Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now in the wake of the very, very special occasion. I'm just kidding. My birthday stream is just like any other stream. I just randomly decided to up the stream up to 1440p. Please let me know if that causes any issues during the stream. I'll keep an eye on my iPad, which is always next to me, and I have the stream running on 5G there. So I'll know when if there's trouble with that. My upload at home should be fast enough for that, but just warning you, I just wanted a very nice, clean image, I guess. It's also going to be easier when I stream videos, and only part of my screen shows 1080p, so that makes more sense pixel-wise than having a full 1080p video in like a 1080p container. It's yeah. So today is not like a public service announcement or like an emergency stream. There's nothing that big happening in the world of Apple rumors, news, and leaks. However, we do still have some stuff to cover that was coming out last week when I went on my short weekend trip. And of course, yes, I am a birthday boy today, so I will actually be self-indulgent and read out the super chats early right now. Actually, joining from two of our actual YouTube MarkTech Pro Max channel members, Max Maximus joining in with an 11.99 euro. Super chat saying, "Happy birthday, man. We'll try to tune in, but you know how it is with our schedules." Yeah, brother, I know. Like, believe me, half the time I don't even know what my schedule is. So, definitely don't not forcing you to adapt to that. But thank you so much. He's wishing us a nice stream and looking forward to the M4 talk. Well, there is going to be M4 talk. There's going to be M4 Geekerwan reactions and other reactions today. I'm open to suggestions. We have more people joining in, wishing happy birthday. Thank you so much. And Steve wishing a happy birthday in a non-super chat, but then coming in clutch and saying he's going to listen during his workout, which granted, that's also how I treat my live stream views, not my own, but when I watch something live on YouTube, not really on Twitch, but at least in the past. So yeah, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for donating. Steve, thank you for the 249. Max Maximus for the 11.99. Shout out to both of you and Angelica, who are all MarkTech Pro Max channel members right here on YouTube. So if anybody wants to support this channel, you can leave a super chat or a super sticker. You can become a channel member right here on YouTube. You can become a supporter over on Patreon. So plenty of opportunities to engage with me, with the community, and just become an even more awesome channel member. So thank you also for leaving likes for those guys. They very, very much deserve it. Without further ado, let me briefly check one last time if everything is working all right. Yeah, great. So that way I can actually transition into a little bit of Apple news and rumors that has been accumulating over the last couple of days. Actually, this one is very, very new. And it's one of those rumors that I absolutely don't believe, and it's coming from Minchi Kuo, which I guess this is happening now more often. Rosa, thank you so much. I love people giving birthday wishes in multiple languages. So some German here, some English there. That's cool. So according to Minchi Kuo, Apple will release its own smart home camera. So we are not talking smart home like HomePod with camera for FaceTime or something like that, right? Which we had this rumor now for a while, a rumor that I would be much more inclined to believe than this one about basically like an iMac G4, you know, with like that cute hinge. Basically combining a HomePod and some video watching capabilities, some home control capabilities on it, right? Maybe you watch like a YouTube video while you cook or something like that. You, of course, answer a FaceTime call. It would probably have something like Center Stage built in, right? So nothing new. But now the problem is whenever we are talking about like really, really limited accessories that only do one thing, I really wonder what would Apple's pitch be here. And the only thing that I can think of right now is honestly there would be a pitch on privacy, right? If Apple came in and said, "Look, this works with iCloud and only iCloud," and Apple already has some integration for smart home cameras and stuff like that. And now, thanks to AI, Apple Intelligence at that point will be like what, on Gen 3.0 or something like that, or 3.0. Rayos, sorry, missing you guys up. That's not wasn't intentional. Wishing happy birthday, Josephat. Thank you guys. Thank you so much. That would be my interpretation. Like Apple could pitch that as a privacy feature. They could potentially offer like special iCloud storage deals, like a terabyte for half the price of the regular one or something like that. Basically, still enticing you to buy shit. But they could also be like, oh, face detection stuff like that works on device, right? We built like, I don't know, an A17 chip inside or something like that. Something that at that point would be older, but like basically somewhat AI capable. Or it just hands over all the tasks to an iPhone at the end of the day. But let's see what Min-Chi Kuo himself wrote actually here. Apple will enter the smartphone camera market in 2026. Now, I always encourage people, whenever you see a leaker talk about something 2 years in advance or more, usually take that with more of a grain of salt, even if that leaker is somewhat reliable, for the simple reason that a lot of plans change. There's also a lot of like prototypes and internal things that Apple develops over time. Is a lot of stuff gets canceled, a lot of stuff gets rolled into larger projects. Apple might work on this. I mean, Apple canceled the Apple Car, right? Like, it isn't too unfathomable to believe that Apple was experimenting with like a smart home camera, but like in 5-6 months from now, some engineer and some penny pincher will say, you know what, that's an unreliable thing. It's not gonna generate enough profit. We don't know if we have like the internal resources to keep updating it or something like that. This is what I'm saying. The fact that it's for 2026, it can mean bad stuff. Hannah Tana saying, happy birthday, bro. How old are you now? I am 28 now. And AV Mail also wishing a happy birthday, seeing a lot of names from all the M4 streams that we've been doing. Thank you guys so much for all of that. So the company will seemingly compete here against third-party HomeKit cameras like Eve endorsed cameras. Sure, the IP camera is targeted to hit annual shipments in the tens of millions. Now that already sounds incredibly far-fetched. Maybe that's like supposed to happen with like a Gen 2 or something. But like, knowing Apple's like historic profit margins, if they come in with a singular like purpose product and it's priced like 30-40% higher than the rest, I just don't know how they will get away with selling tens of millions of those. But who knows? Maybe Apple foresees a huge home market, like home tech market explosion in that area. And I mean, tens of millions could technically be as low as like 20 million something. However, on the annual range, that's still rather high unless we're talking about something like AirPods. So again, there's plenty of reason to doubt this. Not saying it couldn't happen, not saying something like that isn't being developed actually in the background, but it's always questionable. Raydan asking, saying, hey, happy birthday, man. Have you bought the Mac Mini? No, I looked into it. My problem with it, I don't have a standalone display, so that alone is a problem, of course. I would also need a new standalone keyboard. I do have a mouse, of course, as you guys know. Plenty of advertising happening here on Logitech. Hey, Logitech, sponsor me. But the other point is, I'm just so happy with my M1 Max MacBook Pro. If the configuration of the Mac Mini that I would want would come in at €1,000, right? Then I would buy it. And I mean like an M4 Pro with at least 1 terabyte. But given that the configuration that I would most likely configure being around 2K, it's not an impulse purchase anymore. It's definitely affordable. It's definitely not completely overpriced. But given that I would need to create a new accessory ecosystem around it, and now my most capable device, especially in terms of CPU, would technically be a desktop rather than my laptop, I would have to rethink, would I still keep my MacBook and stuff like that? So if anything, I'm more inclined to just wait for the eventual tandem OLED MacBook Pro and just everything else, just let it fall to the wayside. Like, as much as I like talking about Apple's desktop Macs, I am one of those like 80% plus of their Mac consumer base who will buy a laptop over a desktop. We have heard for a while that Apple is plotting a more serious attempt to crack the smart home space. Granted, yeah, but nothing like a camera like that. So Apple would leverage here Siri and Apple Intelligence features, which I guess for 2026 is going to put Apple very much in the catch-up category, where everyone else will be doing something like that already. However, it's unclear at this stage what unique functionality Apple could offer through a first-party camera. So thank you guys here for actually covering similar concerns that I have had, rather than continuing its integrations with other manufacturers through the Home app. Yeah, this is one thing where I'm like, Apple could just easily partner with like, well, all brands, but some I assume would get like a very lucrative like day one deal, and then just price, like, get money through iCloud and stuff like that, integrated with the iPhone, stuff like something like that. Maybe price even some Apple Intelligence integration for those companies, like give them a decent deal on like using private cloud computer or something like that. Yeah, but right now I really don't see anything unique here. Would be nice if Apple could make some good smart light bulbs, though. I need some good bulbs. Well, doesn't Philips make like good light bulbs? I think they're pretty expensive, but I mean, so would be Apple's, and they are, as far as I know, fully HomeKit integrated. Royuski just got the new M4 MacBook Pro and gave up the Mac Mini because I need to transfer to Menu Place next year. Well, that's absolutely reasonable, and that is why Apple is offering that choice, right? Like, this is why I always am confused by rumors like this, because an accessory like the HomePod or the Apple TV, they do make some amount of sense to me, because without those accessories, like, Apple wouldn't exist in like the home theater, right? Something to control the TV, something to control your home music and stuff like that. But with a camera, it's just one extra accessory that you really don't interact with much. So yeah, it's a little confusing. The first big Apple smart home play will be a new smart display device that is likely going in sale sometime next year. The new smart display will combine a HomePod-like speaker with a small squarish touchscreen for showing a visual user interface. Yeah, that is honestly, like, I know of course you wouldn't be able to use that like a camera, because especially if you want to have some outdoor functionality, you're probably not going to put like a $300 HomePod plus tablet combo out there. But I just feel like if that starts selling well, Apple might just say like, you know what, we're just going to partner with somebody else, put all our home accessory resource into 2-3 devices rather than 4 or 5. Gonna confuse consumers less and stuff like that. So yeah, for now I am really inclined to not believe it, but it did come out today, and it is like a rumor about new Apple hardware, so I kind of couldn't afford to not cover it. Mail, Philips Hue were the first big smart bulbs, but are so expensive. Well, you asked for wait, who asked? I believe it's Onichan, right? Who asked for small bulbs from Apple. I doubt Apple's would be cheaper than Philips. Yeah, but Philips Hue, I believe Apple even sells them through the Apple Store, right? So that being said, let's move on to the next part of Apple hardware rumors, one that I know some of you might find very disappointing. And that is that the iPhone 17 Air might not be as thin as Apple initially had hoped. Now, I should note that this is a weird one. It's coming from EUX112 on Naver, so don't ask me about the reliability of that source. I honestly don't remember ever covering something from them in the past. So, but apparently the idea is that the battery of the iPhone 17 Air will be around 6 millimeters thick. So I assume it's something from 5.5 to 6.5 or something like that, right? Which of course would mean that the overall device is probably not much thinner when you of course consider the outer glass, with the display and stuff like that, some shielding for heat dissipation and stuff like that, you are probably not looking at a device significantly thinner than 7.5 millimeters at this point, which would put it very much in the range of like the other iPhones, to be honest. Like, sure, at 8.3 millimeters they might be thicker, but barely. Some are putting it that would mean that it would be thicker than like the iPhone 6 here, 6.9 millimeters, 6 Plus at 7.1. What that could mean for even thicker, thicker comparison, like I remember like 7.5 millimeters or something like that. Was it the iPhone 5? And I believe the iPhone 4 was like 9.3 millimeters, something like that. So it would definitely wouldn't break records for Apple. But given that Apple probably cannot afford to ship a product with terrible battery life these days, I mean, it kind of makes sense. And then the other point is, when you think about the camera protrusion, right? There is the real problem that if you make a device that is actually only as thin as, let's say, the crazy thin iPad Pro at 5.1 millimeters, what does that mean for the camera bump, right? If the camera is not somehow changed drastically internally, I mean, it would maybe that's partially why it's only getting one camera, because if it only has one camera, then Apple only needs to put in resources into redesigning that singular camera. They can keep the ultra wide and the telephoto cameras the same thickness and just reserve them for the regular model and the pros. But I'm just so confused. So apparently Apple had hoped to make the battery thinner than 6 millimeter, but it so happens that due to cost reasons, maybe logistical reasons too, manufacturing consistency and stuff like that, they might not be able to do that. My assumption is that that would probably come in the form of a silicon carbon battery, which we have actually covered on this channel in some Chinese competitors. That would have probably allowed Apple to make a battery around 5 millimeters thick or something like that, while actually still giving it a decent battery capacity. And while I do assume that with 6 millimeter thick battery, it could still come in below like what the iPhone 16 and 16 Plus offer at 7.8, and definitely below what the Pros offer, but I would probably assume it might be still even be thicker than like a 6 Plus. And again, given what I said about the camera and given what people worry about with the structural rigidity of a product, and of course thermals and stuff like that, I am kind of happy that we will not be seeing like a 5.1 5.4 millimeter thick iPad. Oni-chan saying, if anything, Apple designed smart bulbs should be less painful to use for that price. Yeah, I assume you wouldn't need like any like separate controller for them, right? James, yo, I got my Mac Mini M4 base model with the Touch ID keyboard and Magic Mouse. Very, very happy. Great deal. Very, very happy for you, man. Maybe I should actually try Philips Hue for once, then some random off-brand. Yeah, or look at some YouTube videos, right? If they explain to you what the exact differences are. There are a ton of YouTubers who just test any kind of random tech shit at this point, so you probably should be able to find what you're looking for. So that about wraps up the rumor mill that I wasn't able to cover. There's, of course, all the iOS 18.2 beta 3 stuff coming out. The latest beta just launched yesterday. So update if you are, of course, on the developer or soon public beta version. Or of course, with, for example, the WatchOS beta had some trouble installing. So as always, some carefulness when it comes to installing betas. Mine are working fine. Cannot really complain. Beta 2, Beta 3 have all been pretty good now. Beta 1 of iOS 18.2 was pretty bad for a couple of days. So that's my basic impression of the current beta state of Apple's software. Now let's actually get to the good stuff, and that is M4. Now when we are talking M4, we are of course talking about the entire M4 family that now exists across the iMac, the Mac Mini, and the MacBook Pro, going from the M4 to the M4 Pro and the M4 Max. Of course, the biggest upgrade this year being the M4 Pro, that goes up from a 12-core CPU consisting out of 6P and 6E cores up to a 14-core CPU consisting out of 10P cores and 4E cores. Of course, we do have all the architectural improvements with some ray tracing boost over the M3 generation, that incredible single core performance. We even have slightly higher max single core boost clocks at M4 Pro and M4 Max at 4.5 gigahertz rather than 4.4 on the M4. We have, of course, support for ARMv9 and scalable matrix extensions. So plenty of stuff that we have talked about in the past. Notebook Check is a pretty good website. They're not perfect, but they're good enough when it comes to aggregating data, and they do provide their own benchmarks. So here is them obviously summarizing a lot of what we have talked about in the past, how big the chips are, how many cores they have, how much memory bandwidth you got. Of course, M4 capping out at 120 gigabits per second by using 7,500 megatransfers per second memory over a 128-bit bus. The M4 Pro across all the binned and the unbinned versions, giving you 273 gigabytes per second over a 256-bit bus using 8533 memory. And then the M4 Max differentiating in the amount of memory and the exact configuration, with the binned version only, quote unquote, going up to 410 gigabits per second over a 512-bit bus using 8533 memory, and then disabling basically like 25% of that bus. That is why the peak memory bandwidth here is almost 550, and you can configure that one up to 128 gigabytes of total memory. Again, we've covered all of that in the past. Let's see what they do. What's great about Notebook Check is how their graphs work, where you can actually see, like, the moment you hover over something, it just shows you how much faster something is or how much slower something is. Again, here the M4 Pro at 177. I've seen M4 Max results as high as 181, but that's still an incredibly high result. Over, let's look at the M3 Pro. That's a 24% improvement. Actually, even when you look at the M3 Max, granted, that's in the margin of error between 23 and 26%, but you see those very, very nice uplifts. The M3 Pro here coming in actually slightly higher over the M3 Max. So again, when it's just 1 or 2%, that's all in the margin of error. What's interesting is, of course, that when we look at the competition with, for example, the 9950X going up to 5.7 gigahertz, you get 136. Here you get a substantial improvement of 30% over a desktop part like this. This one is, of course, not held back in any way by like lower clocking through 3D Vcache. That's what's happening a little bit with the 9800X 3D. But then again, the 3D Vcache also technically helps a little bit with the IPC, or at least with how much data you can handle on the chip. When it comes to the one of the fastest laptop chips that you can use, the Intel Core i9 14900HX, This is where you see basically an almost 2 generational uplift with almost 40% more performance on the single core. Uh, Absolute insanity. Now, granted, this isn't Intel's latest generation, but Intel's latest generation doesn't actually offer significantly more performance. So while Mobile Arrow Lake will clock faster than Intel's Lunar Lake, there is a question there, given what we have seen on the CPU side. Like, let me just look. Is the 285K already here? Intel 285K. So how much does that deliver? Here. And that is their highest clock desktop version. And the M4 Pro is 24% faster. So Intel almost definitionally would be a generation behind Apple if that competition was actually comparing desktops, because don't forget, those are mobile chips, in fact highly mobile chips. Some of those chips clock in below like 50 watts and below 70 or 80 watts on the entire die when combining CPU and GPU loads. So huge advantage for Team Apple here. That is now Geekbench in the single core score. You see that Zen 5 competes and pretty well, I would argue. I know some people will like downplay here. They will talk about scalable matrix extensions being included in Geekbench 6.3. Once again, I ask you though, when in Cinebench 2024, and Cinebench being notoriously like a very PC focused benchmark, if the improvement here from the 285K is 24%, and from the 9950X it's 30%, right? While in Geekbench, from the 9950X, that gap actually shrinks by 15%, by half, right? And for the 285K, it's almost the same, but actually still lower than for Cinebench. I ask you, which one of those tests is actually the Apple bench here, right? If what you get here is very much higher as a difference than on Geekbench. So yeah, like obviously, all those tests, by the way, for x86 have some level of AVX 512 support, AVX2, and stuff like that. Nobody cared about that when that stuff obviously had no alternative on like the ARM chips. Now that Apple actually bothered to create a very capable SME accelerator and put it, God forbid, next to their CPU rather than stupidly right on the already huge cores, right, and create needless extra space and create potentially higher L1, L2 cache latency, they just put it as almost like an extra core next to the CPU. And guess what? It's still part of the CPU. So yeah, if anybody wants to say that Geekbench like just outrageously favors Apple, guess what? This year, Cinebench outrageously favors Apple more so than Geekbench. Maybe, just maybe, their architecture is just that good. And of course, the M4 Max being here the only chip to hit over 4,000 points. Really a show-offy achievement here. So when it comes to efficiency meters, now I'm always not quite sure how super precise it is here, but it stands to reason that it's decent because those data points do make sense. This is a Cinebench 2024 single power efficiency. I don't care about Cinebench R23. It's not in any way optimized. But you can see that technically the M4 Pro actually comes a little bit below the efficiency of the regular M3. But let me look at the M3 Pro. Why isn't that included? Let me see the full config. Does not include that here? M3, M4 Pro, Snapdragon X Elite. Oh, okay. So this is okay. So they do not have data points for everything. That's a little bit unfortunate, because I wonder, like, the comparison here is, well, they do say the M3 Pro was here more efficient than the M3, so I wouldn't worry that the M4 Pro is that much. But I would love to see the M4, because the M4 is clocked 100 megahertz lower, so that could make up a lot of that difference, basically. Because once you add that extra bit of, like, even 2 or 3% of performance, you can potentially pay for that with like 10-12% of extra power consumption, and therefore a loss of efficiency. So that would be interesting. But if M4 overall at its high clock speeds is less efficient than M3, that wouldn't surprise me. I would like to see efficiency metrics at equal clocks, and then of course at equal performance, but that's probably too much to ask. But that would be something that I would love to see, like, those old Anantech graphs. Those were really, really great. Guys, we've been streaming for about half an hour. Thank you guys so much for joining me on my birthday. This will probably not be too big of a stream, but you've already seen I love interacting with your chat, so please make it a lively live chat. Ask me questions, give me suggestions. I'm open for all of it. And of course, if you want to support this channel directly, become a channel member right here on YouTube, become a supporter over on Patreon, and whenever you catch me live, you see how Max Maximus and Steve have already done it. Please consider leaving a small donation in the form of a super chat or a super sticker. And of course, beyond that, do all the YouTube jazz: subscribing, liking, sharing, commenting, whatever floats your boat. Oni-chan, Synthetics benchmark doesn't tell everything. Yeah, but that's the point. When it comes to the overall efficiency of that chip combined with Mac OS, it's probably such an unfair, huge advantage that it's honestly unfair for the other chips, right? Because the X Elite, as much as I shit on it for like its way too high clock speeds given the 4 nanometer and the first gen Orion cores, right? It's really Windows that makes it really bad potentially, especially since we've seen that, like, unlike Linux, it delivers even higher scores. So if you just took the score, and hopefully it happens at the same power consumption, then you automatically have like higher efficiency. And obviously also for multi-core comparisons, don't forget that macOS is significantly better at leveraging E-cores, while Windows has historically had issues in utilizing E-cores to the point of not actually hampering the performance of the P-cores. And for example, for the X Elite, that one doesn't even have E-cores, which is a baffling decision in my opinion. But yeah, so however you want to see that, Apple definitely does have the most efficient chips. It's just for you to decide whether or not the M3 is actually more efficient than the M4 generation. If we look at the 258V, you see like huge differences here, which honestly, they are kind of true, right? I mean, by this metric, basically, the M4 Pro is twice as efficient. That's honestly pretty reliable, considering that you easily get like higher battery life even on the M4 Pro version than Intel's 258V. And don't forget, of course, the Pro chips consume more power than the base models. And yeah, the base models just run circles around Arrow Lake. What do we have here with Ryzen AI? Yes, it does make sense. Zen 5 is efficient, but this is on 4 nanometer. The CPU cores on Lunar Lake are on 3 nanometer, so it makes sense for there to be some difference. And again, how large that difference actually is, if it's actually like 30% or something like that, that is always a little questionable. There's always some margin of error. True, Windows ARM still isn't great after all these years. I would almost say that it really doesn't even count at this point how many years it's been, given for how long they almost gave up on it. Mostly due to app developer and used to develop for multi-architecture, while Linux, Unix always being easy to port. And don't forget, people who use Linux, the problem is Linux is a very lightweight system. The problem is you probably don't actually want a super lightweight system as your main system. Like you want background tasks. You want, once your system ramps up for a task that you are likely to use, to go into memory and stuff like that. So while Linux in a way is kind of the best case scenario to test the chip, it's not really what you would want to use for most people. It's certainly not on laptop. This is why most Linux enthusiasts just build themselves tower PCs. Multi-core performance and efficiencies. So that's Cinebench 2024, CPU multi-core. This is versus the M4 Pro. So the for Max would deliver higher results. Probably enough to beat this. This is 1828. I believe the 7945HX is a 16-core CPU, right? 7945HX. That one has... Yeah, it has 16 CPU cores. So this is basically just taking the desktop chiplets and putting them on laptop. That chip is almost impossible to get on a laptop because basically no manufacturer bothered on implementing it. There are a few ones here, but barely anything. And at this point, you are probably gonna get up to 16 cores on Strix Halo. Right, you will have the two chiplets. They are combined with like a GPU die. But at this point, damn, that's really like if that was what it takes to beat Apple at much higher power consumption, and those devices are thick and heavy and run their fans incredibly loud. 4900HX is similar story here. Want to just make sure I get the exact core count correctly. 14900HX. So, okay, whatever. So it has 8P and 16E cores. So we are talking about a 24-core CPU, max clock speed of 5.8 gigahertz, even if it's more like 5.7. But like, yeah, this is what it takes. Like it's that invincible meme of like, look what it takes them to mimic a fraction of our power. And again, that's against the M4 Pro, not against the M4 Max. But Cinebench Multi, definitely some really good results for Apple's not even largest chip here. Actually outperforming the M3 Max, which is very impressive. Stands to reason that if here the 7945HX is 19% faster, the M4 Max would be faster than that. And yeah, some pretty good results in general. Again, Cinebench, I always say Cinebench should be more of a GPU test, but unfortunately, this PC market kind of has learned to rely on it more as a GPU test. So, and Geekbench Multi. So M4 Pro at 22,500. The M4 Max here being more a 26,000 point chip. So with Multi in Geekbench, it wins. And for single, well, it wins everything basically once you account for the M4 Max. But Geekbench is more friendly towards the Apple architecture in multi-core, and Cinebench seemingly is more favorable towards Apple architecture in single-core. So every test has its up and downs. If somebody just screams, oh, it's Apple Bench, oh, it's a conspiracy theory on the internet, that person is a moron. And you see a similar reduction in efficiency here in Cinebench 2024 from the base M3 to the M4 Pro. Then we have some graphics tests. The M3 Max, of course, still beating the M4 Pro here. Don't know why they say M4 20-core GPU. That's the M4 Pro. 63% higher, so the scaling isn't quite perfect, even though there's also like literally double the bandwidth on the 40 core. Oh no, that's actually true. That's the M3 Max, not the M4 Max. Well, yeah, then the scaling actually makes sense. Because it does have only like 50% more bandwidth. Then we have the actual competition with 4060, 4070 laptops. When it comes to the actual games, I would expect most games on the 4070 laptop GPU to be quite competitive with the M3 Max. But in this case here, it has an almost a generational advantage, basically, of almost 40%. So M4 Max coming in 20% higher than that should beat out 4070, 4060 very, very comfortably. Probably beat out a lot of 4080s and then come in around the level of many 4090s. I'm phrasing this carefully because I know there's high variability when it comes to what wattage those chips are given, of course, but Apple also, of course, does have its own advantages, disadvantages with an SoC system, not the highest cooling. So overall, very, very impressive stuff. And we definitely see here that the M3 Pro here has a nice 33% uplift over the M3 Pro. So, and that, again, that is Wildlife Extreme Unlimited. That test isn't even very favorable towards Apple GPUs. Steel Nomad Lite, that is the chip that the test that I'm more interested in. Here we see no testing, and apparently on the M3 Max. But we see the 4070 beating out the M4 Pro by 50%. This one is, of course, would put the M4 Max highly above that if the scaling works out well. That would put it around the range, actually, of the binned M4 Max. So very, very interesting to see how real world scales here. It's, again, unfortunate they haven't test results for everything. But yeah, what really stands out to me is the fact that the M4 is pretty close to a 3050. And just knowing how much more power the 3050 consumes, which are more than the CPU and the GPU combined here twice over and more, that is really, really good for like mobile gamers if games happen to be optimized for macOS, of course. Also, pretty great scaling here on the M4 Pro. You see that Still Nomad Lite, similar to other 3D Mark tests, really, really likes bandwidth. And so you can see the benefit of using twice the memory bus, plus the uptick from using 8533 memory over 7500 mega transfers per second memory. Onicha, Microsoft built ARM over x86 transition layer ahead of Linux. Wasn't surprising because almost all Linux apps can native compile until Asahi Linux fix FAX for Mac device gaming. Yeah, but again, this is really stuff that most regular consumers don't want to deal with. They deal with a translation layer, for example, on the Steam Deck, but that's because it's a very console-like, almost automatic solution. Most people don't even think about there being a compatibility layer, except for a few competitive mobile games, right? Where the anti-cheat system might prevent you or something like that. But yeah, for regular consumers, though, compatibility layers and stuff like that, of course, the potential for using something like Asahi Linux and shit like that, it's really not a viable long-term solution. Kevchata, I got the M3 Pro. I'm returning because return Windows ending sucks. I don't have enough days to test it out because I only paid $14.50. Hope base M4 is better. Judging from tests, the M4 is better in CPU in basically every way than the binned M4 Pro, than the binned M3 Pro. And when it comes to GPU, the M3 Pro still wins, but definitely while using more power. So you win some, you lose some. So I don't think you will be unhappy with a base M4 versus an M3 Pro. So then GFX Bench, again, a very, by the way, let me show you how much of an Apple fan I am, right? And the way I show you that I'm an Apple fan is by being truthful with you. So when somebody asks me, is the GeForce RTX 4070 really only as fast as the M4 Pro? Don't forget, this is a GPU that kind of uses 20-25 watts. The 4070 uses like 75-80 watts. Could be configured higher, right? My answer is no. The 4070 is definitely faster. Now we can argue, is it 20% faster? Is it 40% faster? Is it 60% faster or something like that? That to me doesn't matter. What matters to me here is the fact that GFX Bench, even though in this specific test, DM4 Pro absolutely beats the living shit out of like the 4060, right? I know that that is not going to be the case in the real world. Now, if you ask me for like power consumption aligned performance, there is something interesting. But no, the M3 Max, for all my love of it, is not a third faster than a 4070 laptop GPU, at least not a decent one. So while this test is extremely favorable towards Apple's architecture, I have no idea why. It's probably just an old ass test at this point. But I will not be suddenly singing the praises of GFX Bench. GPU metal, similar here. I am also like, I know that the developer of this test has said that it's designed to be cross compatible with like other operating systems and through the use of other APIs. While that's true, I don't really believe it's that well optimized for something like Vulkan. So I would only use it ever to compare between like iPhones to iPhones, iPads to iPads, Macs to Macs. So again, I could also say that Apple wins here, especially when you like look at mobile chips. But I yet do try to be honest with you guys. This is not an Apple bootlicker channel. This is an Apple appreciation channel. 1440p again. M4 Pro winning against the 40X RTX 4070, 50% lead for the M3 Max. It could potentially result in 2x the performance on an M4 Max versus a 4080. Again, could be if you limit the power of the 4070, but that's not why you're buying a 4070 laptop. Just saying. So this is something I don't care. It's efficiency comparison using Witcher. So it's not a native test, and even Cyberpunk, of course, right now is not does not have a native port. While I do understand it's obviously testing through like a similar compatibility layer, so you would arguably have a decent way to compare Apple chips to Apple chips. It's really more of a hit and miss to me. Like any new architecture could potentially become a little worse at like dealing with the compatibility layer. It won't impact you as a regular consumer. Just saying. What is hilarious though to me is to see higher efficiency here through a compatibility layer on Apple versus NVIDIA natively. But yeah, this is why this test to me doesn't honestly matter too much, and I will not use it to artificially inflate like M4 family results. You see, they also like tested the MacBook Pro in general here. One thing I wanted to point out, and this is something I wanted to ask. Now, I know that slow response times is something people complain about. The way Apple's like mini LED algorithm is set up, it really favors like high quality response versus fast response time. I would argue maybe it's not actually 70 milliseconds, rather slower than mini LED on other devices being in the sub 20 millisecond range, but who knows? What would interest me to anybody else who has like mini LED Apple screens, have any of you issues with PWM? Like pulse width modulation, you know, that thing that gives people like potentially a headache on many mobile OLED screens. I never felt like my screen was flickering, which is how they describe PWM. Like, granted, I didn't see PWM on like the iPhone XS Max either back in the day, so I'm probably not very sensitive to it. Angelica, thank you so much for the happy birthday wishes. But yeah, this is something I would be interested, because I have the M1 iPad Pro with mini LED, and I have the M1 Max MacBook Pro with mini LED, and never has it occurred to me that there is a problem with pulse width modulation. Oni-chan saying, Apple fixed critical bugs fast to my surprises. An anime game update has issues with Rosetta. We debug and report to Apple. Apple surprised we even find it. 1 week later, fix drop in dev beta. Well, that's kind of cool. But they did say they would be more quick in responding to bugs and stuff like that, and in general to consumer demands. I would argue we have seen that a lot during the last 4 to 5 years, where Apple has been really adding a lot of features. Even something like, I remember, was it here? Telosive Tech Camera iOS. Like, I remember this was like a long requested feature of like switching between like different frame rates and stuff like that, and not doing it in the settings app. And I just remembered it being a really big deal when Apple added it. Maybe I'm mixing that up with something else at this point, but maybe the word camera just has come up so often at this point. But I'm just trying to tell you, Apple has been a lot more responsive over the last couple of years.
不久前啊，苹果
We'll get to you, don't worry. Let me see. So that was just one thing I wanted to mention. Now, they did do some pretty like decent like stuff here. They even tested like the SD card slot. What surprised me is I thought that maybe some other devices had like faster SD card slots, but it looks at this point Apple has a very decent SD card slot here. Also for Wi-Fi, they did compare it to other devices. Now those are all Wi-Fi 6E devices. I believe this is like Qualcomm Fast Connect 7800. Is that a Wi-Fi 7 connectivity card? Yeah, it's Wi-Fi 7. So one thing that I also wanted to tell people, when it comes to peak tests, Riveting Tail Chair, welcome, brother, saying happy birthday, my good sir. Thank you so much back, good sir. So when it comes to peak download speeds, Apple is delivering pretty good results. The max promised ones are at around 2400 mbits per second. So I assume that by the time Apple builds in Wi-Fi 7 into their Macs, they will actually double that speed, because what a lot of people don't know is that the iPhone 16 and 16 Pro added Wi-Fi 7 without actually improving that peak download speed, because they did not adopt 3200 megahertz, like double the bandwidth over Wi-Fi 6E. Now, you do benefit from combining all the bands. It does have some advantages for if you're using a lot of devices on one network. Of course, a newer modem in general is also usually more efficient and stuff like that. But I guess Apple told themselves, you know what, on the Mac, if it doesn't have faster bandwidth, we might as well not bother, because we have just so much better antennas. We do not have extra power consumption from like a 5G modem simultaneously, right? Which is sometimes real power draw on the iPhone or the iPad even. So they just said, you know what, we have pretty fast speeds here. Let us keep to that. Apparently they do have the same modem, but it seems to perform pretty much identically here, between the M3 Max a little faster than the M4 Pro. Maybe the M3 Max just utilizes its internal bandwidth better, but all of those results are basically in the margin of error for Wi-Fi, right? Never forget that Wi-Fi is not the most reliable technology. We do have some outliers here, but nothing too crazy, especially not for Apple. We do have a testing of the 12 megapixel camera. They do mention here some shortcomings, that the quality of recordings isn't much better than before, which also applies videos which are still at max 1080p, and the lack of Face ID support. I've seen some people claim that in decent lighting conditions it's a lot better, but given my own personal experience with center stage 12 megapixel cameras, which is of course what's in my iPad Pro, I wouldn't be too surprised if the actual improvement for the area that covers your face, like the 1080p, isn't actually dramatically better. But of course, still center stage is fun, and given that I feared for a second we might actually have a quality reduction because the pixels themselves would be a lot smaller, because I guarantee you the sensor is not actually 6 times larger. It is definitely going to be interesting to see real world tests here. Actually, one thing that I would be very interested is, did MaxTech finally have their side-by-side for the MacBook Pro? They did. Oh, we have to watch that before we watch Geekerwan. Guys, do you agree with me that we should watch that first? Let me know, because and by the way, we are almost an hour into the stream. We have quite a few people watching. Please like the video, share it out to anybody who think might enjoy it. Comment live. You see, I love interacting with a lively live stream. Give me suggestions, give me drama, whatever else you can find. And if you want to support this channel directly, leave a super chat or a super sticker as a small donation. Become a channel member right here on YouTube, or support over Patreon. It's all very, very much appreciated. I saw a stream that showed fan speed of M3 Pro, M4, and M4 Pro while under stress. M3 Pro was least noisy. Base M4 was the noisiest because of only one fan. Yeah, there's also, of course, the question of maybe the fans themselves are a little noisier. Maybe you also hear a little bit more coil whine because there's also more voltage going into it. That being said, for most real-world tasks, because of the high efficiency of just the M4 architecture and the M3 architecture, your fans are probably never spinning up except for higher performance tasks. And once you do those higher performance tasks, it's kind of up to you to also use something like TG Fan Pro and control it a little bit yourself. So yeah, there's a lot to consider here. Maintenance, sustainability, all not too important to us. Again, they do here have the response times and things like that. So some things to complain about. Performance metrics, we've of course covered a lot of that. With storage, small reminder, if you're getting the M4 Pro versions and the M4 Max, those are faster than the M3, than the chips on the base M4 chips. So if you want a small boost for whatever reason there, you get that. Well, that small boost is actually 2 times faster, but you probably won't feel it through most tasks. The other point is you have here other benchmarks as well. Shadow of the Tomb Raider, Total War 3 Kingdom. Again, very, very little native testing. So we'll get to actually some gaming results when we get to the Geekerwan stuff. But you see that, of course, here we are starting to be held back by some... Well, here you can actually see on the M3 Max, you can see that it performs quite okay at Baldur's Gate, which is a native app, but then the rest isn't. Shadow of the Tomb Raider supports the Metal API, but it is an x86 application at its core. Let's see how much comes. Again, Phantom Liberty, there is Apple here, MacBook Pro for M3 Max. a lot faster than like a 4070 GPU. Let's see how those tests actually pan out once we have native versions of those tests. But yeah, if you are buying a Mac and you want to game through a compatibility layer like crossover, don't expect the greatest results. That's my takeaway here. Again, a lot of data here, even for like fan noise and stuff like that. So again, hard to say sometimes when they like for what it means for Witcher. Again, compatibility layer and stuff like that. But check out Notebook Check. They do some pretty in-depth reviews here. One thing I did want to do they have battery? Yeah. So very, very, very nice battery life here, of course. I believe this is in minutes, right? So 947, 911, that's 15 hours here. On the M4 generation, on the M3 generation, and then you see kind of everything else falling behind it. Whether or not something is actually more efficient, I mean, in this test, the M3 Pro outperforms the M4 Pro just a little bit, but yeah, of course, you do get that significant increase in like P-core, so that makes total sense to me. Beyond that, there is some slight amount of testing that I wanted to mention. You guys can check out if you're into photo editing, and that is of course Petapixel. Those are the guys who previously did a lot of the DP review website for cameras. Right, so this is their MacBook Pro review. That one of those guys really likes to use Macs. One thing that I wanted to really hear about is the display here. The only other major change to the design of the laptop is the choice to add Apple's nano texture displays, which significantly reduces glare. The MacBook Pro has been very prone to glare over the years, which is actually a phenomenal thing to say, given that out of all glossy screens, it is the screen with by far the lowest reflectivity, but just a lot of laptops go automatically for a more matte finish. And would have to rely solely on pure brightness to overcome it. Now it has another tool in its arsenal, although the implementation is slightly different than nanotexture has been on previous Apple devices. While those two devices like PDXDR and iPad Pro have a layer of glass which is then etched with the nanotexture, the MacBook Pro doesn't use the same glass cover. The nanotexture is therefore instead embedded on the inside of the display, which is a detail I didn't know, and this is why I hope they're correct. Maybe they asked Apple, maybe I should just read more on their website. The effect is the same or similar enough, and I guess it explains some of the difference to something like the iPad, because the iPad has very, very different visual like effect of using nanotexture. The effect is the same or similar enough, and Apple includes its special polishing cloth too, but it's not strictly necessary. Yeah, but it is recommended. In practice, the nanotexture display has, to me, no downsides. Guys, this is coming from a photo and video editor. They are not quick to say something has no downsides. That is actually pretty great. Indoors, I didn't notice anything different about the display versus the M3 Max MacBook Pro from last year. Outside, in direct sunlight, is a different story. The nanotexture treatment on this year's MVP makes an enormous difference. I was struggling to even see what was on the screen of a laptop without it, even with it set to maximum brightness. In contrast, I was able to see everything. Now, that's probably also the help of the 1000 its brightness outdoors on the nanotexture display without problems. If you like to work outside, or if you find yourself near bright light sources, ceiling lights, windows, etc., this is a worthwhile upgrade. So just wanted to make sure this is probably the best like short summary of nanotexture, nano-etched texture by somebody who I actually trust. What do you think of MacBook Air M3, 13, 15 inches, pros and cons? Yeah, they do now come with 16 gigs of RAM, of course. So if you want 512 gigabytes by MSRP, you're paying $1,300, or something like that. I think those are good devices. I mean, to me, I would miss something like ProMotion and Mini LED and stuff like that. But honestly, for most people, they're probably the better choice. Just to save money probably feels better than getting extra stuff. But I'll just say, if you have the extra money, like by MSRP, we're talking $300 when you compare 600, when you compare 512 gigabyte configurations, you're really, really getting something special in the 1599 14-inch MacBook Pro. M4 is good, but wouldn't get a Mac solely for gaming. That's absolutely correct. This is why I'm always very careful when I analyze benchmarks like that. Gaming is a bonus. That's correct. That is how I see, for example, emulation on my Mac. It's pretty good for it. In some ways, even pretty great. And while that helps me with gaming, that doesn't give me the illusion that suddenly I have a device that is competitive in gaming with like even an RTX 4050, because I just lack the game support, unfortunately. That's some interesting edge glass detail. First I've heard, yeah, same. Are you getting any tech during Black Friday deals? Nah, I got my PS5 Pro already. Plus, Black Friday has been really messy in Germany here over the last couple of years. It just feels like every good deal is just like artificially increasing the price over something that was already discounted for quite a while and then dropping it back down. So yeah, I just don't like to get seduced by it. Plus the sites that I subscribe to, like a few sites like Pitaka, Anchor and stuff like that, and they send to me emails about like, oh, we have a discount, and whenever I go to like their Black Friday deals, I'm like, oh, that's the same deal you guys have basically every month. And given that I subscribe to like your newsletter because I had some purchases over time with you, I basically get even more of a discount if I buy through you directly on one of your better months than during Black Friday. I guess maybe if you go to like a tech shop, right, directly here in Germany, it would be like MediaMarkt and Saturn. It's really not like, you might get a good deal there, but it's also going to be like store specific. Like they aren't going to just drop the price of everything by 20 or 30%. At anything less than that, honestly, doesn't encourage me to make like impulse purchases. Um, one last thing from the Petapixel guys. Here are some benchmarks for Lightroom Classic. So again, for photo editors, really, really good results when you look here at the M4 Pro Mac Mini and the M4 Max MacBook Pro. However, you also see that the Mac Studio, with its just enormous amounts of cores, which seemingly Lightroom Classic is utilizing quite well simultaneously, is even faster here than the M4 Max. True, big sales come out of the blue. Although in Amazon Prime deals, I got surveillance cameras cheap. Yeah, Amazon Prime is like, I feel like if it's a company that's almost like affiliated with like Amazon, or especially if it's their own stuff, you get a pretty good deal. And then with third parties, you really have to look carefully. Here's JPEG, similar results actually, with the M2 Ultra being the fastest system out of all of those being tested, and the M4 Max MacBook Pro coming in very nicely. This is here the Razer Blade 16 2024. Again, this is the kind of stuff that pros pay thousands of dollars of extra for. So whenever somebody tells you, oh, Apple is just like super poor value, never forget, it really entirely depends on the use case. And there is one fun thing about the Geekerwan video that I'll cover later on. So, but just like for photo editing, this is a great machine. Here's Puget Bench. It tests the rough performance of the latest Photoshop version. You see how these devices are basically in a class of its own. It should be, of course, considered that they don't have too many devices to compare against, like, and there is like not a lot of desktop competition here. So, but just saying, very, very good results. Premiere Pro. Here similarly with Puget Bench. However, this is where, of course, having a dedicated like RTX GPU also will give you very, very powerful results. DaVinci Pro, here actually the M2 Ultra wins. But don't forget that there is, of course, the difference in what encoders you use, right? M4 Max has newer encoders in general. So even if, for example, on the M2 Ultra, the export times might be quicker for some tests, depending on the media you are playing back, the M4 Max might actually deliver a much smoother editing experience. Plus, if you are like also including something like AV1, while the M4 Max doesn't have AV1 encode, at least it does have AV1 decode. So there's a lot of details to consider. If any of you is like a professional video editor, I do trust you to know like your own apps and tests better. Plus, of course, Final Cut Pro, of course, only exists on one system. So I just wanted to show you these tests because there's a lot of good data here. I think this data is getting good enough that I will finally start including it into my long promised like big Excel sheet or Apple number sheet. But yeah, there's also like the MacBook Pro review here from Engadget. I think there's only one thing here. The con was like pricey spec upgrades, which we've of course covered. But like at the very end of the test, because all the other benchmarks they ran are very clear to us, is the battery life here. The 14-inch lasted 34 hours and 15 minutes. Then the 16-inch lasted 30 hours and 60 minutes. That's the first time we've seen our video rundown test go beyond 30 hours. So that means the 16-inch version is the first one to go over 30 hours. And then the 14-inch version comes in and beats that by over 10% still. So whatever Apple is doing here with like the media decoders, definitely some good efficient shit. I like MacBook Airs, but the major flaw is only 2 ports. Yeah, it will be interesting if they give the M4 MacBook Air 2 ports, like an extra port on the other side. So it will have 3 ports similar to the base M4 MacBook Pro. Maybe they would go like very creative, I would call it that, and like use like potentially a lot of M4s that have like silicon issues with one of their Thunderbolt or display engines, and that would lead them to just keep the old port selection. But that would be a little silly in my opinion, given that the iMac, which has its own integrated screen, can have an M4 chip and then 4 Thunderbolt 4 ports. So I'm just wondering, like, it doesn't have like HDMI like the MacBook Pro. It doesn't have to split its lanes any other way. But on the MacBook Air, it doesn't have any other ports except the MagSafe and headphone jack, which aren't data intensive, of course. So yeah, that would be very, very cool. Of course, speaking of battery life, an extra port on the other side adds versatility, gives you extra choice from which side to charge the device, especially if you're somebody who prefers charging via USB-C because you only carry around like one cable for everything. Yeah, absolutely. Like, hopefully the M4 MacBook Air is an improvement in that regard. But that's about all I wanted to cover in Safari. And here I would actually love to cover the max tag comparison between the M3 Pro and the M4 MacBook Pro. And then we'll get to Geekerwan.
Did Apple
I think they've already had some kind of MacBook comparison. Yeah, they compared the base M4 versus the M3 Pro. But given that we, of course, had a lot of understanding about the M4 from the iPad Pro, I am more interested here, of course, especially considering the base configurations. Right, this one has the M3 Pro has 5 P cores and 6 E cores in its base configuration, while the M4 Pro has 8 P cores and 4 E cores. So there should be some nice generational gains. If there's something very interesting, I'll write it down in the notes, given we have had a lot of tests anyway. So let's quickly go through
the M4
this.
Pro MacBook.
Let's watch this in 1080p. It doesn't make sense to watch it in 1440p given the small window size. And let's watch it slightly faster at 1.15 as we tend to do.
The M4 Pro MacBook is probably the best bang for the buck performance laptop
As always,
you can buy,
let me know if my audio is well balanced.
It against
so
the
one
M3
isn't
Pro
screaming
that it
over
is
the
replacing,
other.
because this year Apple upgraded the chip. By far,
yeah, that would be the funniest reason for Apple to not give you an extra USB-C port. It would be them not wanting to drill into the aluminum for another USB-C port.
Most out of the whole lineup compared to last year, the M3 Pro actually got less cores, so this is gonna be a crazy comparison. And here are the full specs side by side. You guys can see we have 24 gigs of RAM now as base, which is awesome. Let's go ahead and get this guy out of the box so you guys can see we have the same exact color, and on the outside they look practically identical. We have the same amount of ports. The display,
yeah, apparently OLED redesign, thinner, everything is only happening in 2026 or later, in 2027 at this point. So better get used to this design that's 3 years old. It might become like 5 to 6 years old.
It is almost the same. It gets a little bit brighter in the daytime with auto brightness, but other than that, it's hard to tell the difference. Let's get right into testing. The first thing I want to do is test out and compare the SSDs. Now, looking at write speed, they are very similar. Actually, the M3 slightly won. Same thing for the read speeds. That's very interesting because I expected it to be a little bit faster, and of course these always change a little bit.
There's absolutely no reason to expect these to be faster. If you want the peak speeds, of course you get the higher end configurations. Larger modules just in general perform a little better, especially for like sequential tests, maybe not for completely random access. But yeah, this, if you want 7500, 60, or at least over 6500, that's where you get 1 terabyte or above. Understanding, but only 2 ports is archaic. If 1 port is damaged over time, I'd be stressed over only having 1 more port. And yeah, but that's why I also tell people, don't buy devices with the understanding, oh my God, it will break, something will break. But yeah, 2 ports ain't great. But I mean, those are 2 Thunderbolt 4 ports. So even if you have only 1 port, you can use like a splitter adapter at that point.
Each run. So it looks like we didn't get a big difference in at least the base 512. And the crazy thing is, I said the ports are the same. They are all the same layout, but the M4 does run Thunderbolt 5 now, the M4 Pro model and Max. So you actually have 3 times faster connectivity for like external SSDs.
The 120 gigabits per second is not exclusive to displays. And I explained that quite a few times on this channel. So Thunderbolt 4 gives you 40 gigabits per second simultaneously in both directions, right? Thunderbolt 5 gives you simultaneously 80 gigabits in both directions. So the total bandwidth on Thunderbolt 4 is actually 80 gigabits per second, and on Thunderbolt 5, it's actually 160 gigabits per second. But what you can do with Thunderbolt 5, and this is why Apple advertises a top speed of 120, is the fact that you can basically use half the speed of the other lane, which would basically be going otherwise in the other direction, and simultaneously have like a higher downloads or upload depending on the direction. Desert was 67. Happy birthday, Eric. Who the F is Eric? You can say the name of my channel, brother. Is that an old-time joke? Were you the guy who called me Eric like a year ago or so? Like, are you one of the OGs? Am I misremembering something? But regardless, thank you.
Faster connectivity for like external SSDs, but their internal hard drives can't even go up that fast, which is insane. Now, as you guys can see, both laptops are charged to 100%, and I'm gonna go ahead and unplug both of them. And as we do these tests, we're gonna see which laptop has better battery life. And now I have Geekbench 6 opened up right here, and as you guys can see, we not only have higher clock speeds for the M4 Pro, but we have a difference in cores. This M3 Pro has 11 cores compared to 12, but this actually only has 5 performance cores compared to 8. So we are gonna probably see a big difference here. And look at these numbers, guys. This is insane. For single core, we're up almost to 4,000, 24% gain, which is awesome. But for multi-core, we're above 20,000. That's 43% gain in performance. When do you get those kind of gains year over year from any other manufacturer?
There is a point to consider, of course, that the M4 Pro was not, the M3 Pro was almost like a side grade in a way to the M2 Pro, which actually came with 8 cores. Granted, I believe in its bint version, it would have been 6 cores. But yeah, it's so you kind of have to count M2 to M4, which obviously a 2-year gap is still a very small gap. And considering that, and I mentioned that on the past on this channel, that like the RTX 4000 generation has now been on the market for well over 2 years, and it seems we're only getting potentially full RTX 5000 announcements and launches somewhere in like January, and that will just be the RTX 5090 and 5080 desktop. So it might take us up until like April, May, June to start getting something in the laptop space. Plus, it is still actually 4 nanometer. So Nvidia isn't waiting for like some revolutionary new node to give you like the biggest gen-on-gen improvement. They're basically just maximizing their sales to server stuff. This is why they're currently I believe, the most valuable stock in the world.
Wow, guys, I have to just mention this again because this score, it's literally at that level of the M3 Max 16-core unbinned, which is a $4,000 computer. This is a binned $2,000 M4 Pro and is getting that level of performance. I mean,
this is why I also tell people to not future-proof their purchases. Like spending 50-60% more on a machine to then get like, oh my god, the next generation is as fast on like the something that was half the cost, so it's like 3 times less expensive at this point. Sure, you configure it nicely with storage and RAM, which you would have to do all over again. But if you get a little bit less, that gives you more money to do it the next year, especially since you still have the opportunity to resell your Mac at a better price. Plus, if your old Mac at that point breaks, that still gives you some opportunity to like be less sad about it. So yeah, never overspend unless you really know you can utilize it. MaxTag is a good actor. Yeah, because of course we have known those scores for a bit. By the time they were making this video, there was nothing crazy about it. We have
the value you're getting for
it
the
was known. Mark, would you get Studio Display and use for 6 years, or cheaper display and replace every 2 years? That actually goes into my question. 3,000 once or versus $1,500 times 3. It depends. If there was a Studio Display that was actually $3,000, but I felt it was actually worth $3,000, by which I mean it would have to have a proper high dynamic range implementation. It would have to have ProMotion implementation with actual decent response times. So hopefully a tandem OLED screen. Then yeah, I would buy it once and use it for years and years to come. I mean, similar to how I got the M1 Max MacBook Pro and I'm still happy with it. While if I maybe got the M1 Pro version, granted I would have the same CPU, but a little bit less cooling in the device as far as I know for it. Plus I would have dramatically less GPU, which I actually, as I told you, I do utilize. So while I maybe didn't need to overspend on the fully enabled M3 Max, the M1 Max, I probably would have bought like the bint version instead. Especially since at that point Apple didn't actually cut the memory bandwidth on the bint Max chip. So the actual performance differentiation, especially in the 14-inch version, wasn't actually that big. And I see that similar with like a Studio Display. If I can get everything I want right away, then yeah, I'm happy to buy it and then just keep it for a long time. I guess like I wouldn't even have to make that like such an abstract example. Like my LG C1, I guess I could have potentially saved money, bought like the 55-inch version or something like that, and then later updated to like an LG G3 or something like that, then went completely crazy. But no, I just bought the 65-inch version. It was like 10-15% discounted, and I plan on keeping it well beyond like into the LG C10 gen at that point. So yeah, that would probably be my approach.
This is insane.
To me, I guess the point is I do get pleasure from upgrading my hardware, but I do get pleasure from my hardware as well, right? I don't need the unboxing experience to know my piece of hardware is good. I do not need to feel like, oh, it's fresh. I'm like, yeah, I can just clean my screen, use some air pressure to like make the keyboard even nicer again, something like that. And then it feels new and great again. If there is something dramatically newer out there, like if there already was a tandem OLED MacBook Pro, maybe I would be like, oh man, if I had spent less, I could now be considering getting another one just out of principle. It's not like money is tight, but yeah, I guess that's my perspective. Mac Mini is the best tech, love the price, but I have no clue on buying monitors and other peripherals. Well, there is also like a Better Display app. I mean, it's literally called Better Display. You can read up on if that fixes, for example, like scaling on displays that don't have what Apple likes as PPI, which is either 110 or 220. Just for a reference points, 110 PPI is 1440p or 2560 by 1440 on a 27-inch panel, and then 220 PPI is exactly 4 times that resolution or 2 times on each axis, which is 5K, which is 5120 times 2880. So that's like Apple's 5K screens, or on a 32-inch monitor, that's 6K. But again, you can sort of play around with other apps that will help you scale your macOS screen a little better to like 1080p, 4K panels, ultra wide displays, and things like that.
And now let's go ahead and take a look at the graphics. As you see, we're jumping from 14 core graphics up to 16 core graphics. Let's go ahead and run this test. And here are the graphics numbers. The M4 Pro practically hits 100,000. We're literally getting 40% better graphics performance year over year. I mean, that is massive in a 1-year upgrade. And now I wanna jump into Xcode, because with all that CPU performance, that can make a major difference. All right, guys, we have a result, and it looks like it only took 108 seconds with the M4 Pro compared to 140. That's about 30% faster, and that is an excellent gain. And to put that into perspective, that's basically the same time as an M1 Ultra Max Studio 20 core that costs $4,000 and just a little bit behind the M2 Ultra desktop. That is just blowing my mind. And now I have Figma opened up right here. This is a web design program, and this project is brought to us by 500 Designs, one of the best design studios in California. I have a lot of high resolution layers here. I'm gonna zoom in and see just how fast everything loads, so we see some pixelation.
This task has never had stutters, even on M1 devices. I'm always curious why they keep using a task that was clearly not bottlenecked in any way. I guess the export times are one thing to test, but just like system responsiveness, if M1 was already good, then what reason is there to keep testing it on the M4 Pro? At least use like a more demanding project or something.
Bam, that loaded up, took a few seconds there. Let's try it with the M4 Pro. We know we have a lot more performance. Let's go to that same spot, and bam, definitely a little bit quicker there.
Isn't that also like browser limited? Or like potentially like the web engine limited? I have no idea.
Now I have these 12 high resolution layers selected. I'm gonna go ahead and export these, and we're gonna see how long it takes. So that took 1 minute and 9 seconds on M4 Pro.
Yeah, you can clearly see this task doesn't scale too well.
Compared to 1 minute and 22, so we're definitely seeing some gains. This is, of course, a web-based application. With that, I also wanna test out Speedometer 3.0. Of course, the M3 Pro is also not a slouch. Here are the results, about 10% difference there. So you're not gaining the full performance of all that multi-core, but There is no faster computer.
It seems to also not account for any IPC gain, so it just scales with the clock speed increase. Maybe at this point it's just such a high result. It's problematic for it to go even higher in speedometer. Maybe at this point we'll need speedometer 4 just for M4 gens and up. Yeah, realize I keep replacing hardware, it gets annoying really fast. Even it may not be the most advanced and shiniest tech, it might be enough anyways. Yeah, I guess my the iPhone is the last device that I see differently in that regard, which is because it has so many different aspects, right? The way I use it outdoors with peak brightness and the thermals to actually sustain it, battery life for everything, raw performance for everything, the camera, right, which is not as important on any other Apple product to me, even like the speakers, the microphones. Plus I usually have somebody to hand down my iPhone, so this is the one device that I would be quite happy to keep upgrading every year. But because the amount of people that I can hand it down to is shrinking, I basically now am on a 2-year schedule.
Web-based applications that a lot of people use than the M4 Pro. And now let's take a look at Logic Pro performance. Both these machines are going to be excellent at it, but let's see what the difference is. Now, we just messed around with this for a long time, and guys, the difference is huge. I was not expecting this. We got 115 layers in this benchmark, new Logic benchmark 2, you guys can look it up, compared to 220. 115 compared to 220.
What? Is that... What? I mean, there is more memory, but there's 1/3 more memory. There's a lot more memory bandwidth, and I assume if we actually look at like the L1 cache, for example, on the main P cores, we actually get a bigger, maybe an almost doubling of effective CPU bandwidth. That could be it, but that's a rather large increase. At what device do we start getting diminishing returns for day-to-day use? No video editing use case. Quite honestly, we have long ago reached those points. The question is just like, what device are you talking about, right? When we are talking about different generations, obviously the newer something is, the more subject it becomes to diminishing returns. But then there's also the consideration, if you have an Air device, right, or an SE device, you have room to upgrade even by side grading, right? If you are already a Pro Max, or Ultra user, you really have strong diminishing returns.
Almost double. How is that possible? Well, the M3 Pro actually did worse than the M2 Pro because we had less performance cores, less memory bandwidth. This matched it and we actually went way higher.
Yeah, okay.
So for Logic, if you really are gonna be pushing it, the M4 Pro has a massive improvement.
This is why I also always encourage to look at 2 or 3 year gaps in performance. Maybe one generation looks very impressive because it actually sucked as an up, because the previous generation sucked over the generation before that. And that was kind of the case of the M3 Pro versus the M2 Pro.
Let's get back to some graphics tests. I have 3D Mark Steel Nomad Lite opened up here in unlimited mode, which is more of a gaming workload. We'll see how many improvements we got. And look at that, guys. We have 37.8 compared to 49.8. That is 32% higher frames per second for the same amount of money. I mean, when do you see those kind of gains year over year? That is crazy.
And this is again one of those examples where M2 Pro results would be very interesting, because they would show that the M3 Pro was incredibly close to the M2 Pro, which means that over 2 years the gains are actually the same as over 1 year.
Now I also want to test out Solar Bay, which also
guys, we have quite a few of you watching. Please like the video, share it out to anybody who you think might enjoy it. Comment live. You see me enjoying a very lively live chat with you guys. Of course, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet done so, and consider supporting this channel directly through a small donation. Leave a super chat or a super sticker when you catch me live. Become a channel member. Shout out to Angelica, Max, Maximus, and Steve. There are some numbers in the names of Steve and Max, but I cannot be bothered to remember those. I like the Maximus part. Shout out to, of course, those two guys also leaving super chats right in the beginning of the stream. And you can also become supporters over on Patreon and follow me on Twitter. That's where I also give a lot of my tech opinions.
In ray tracing, we know that the ray tracing has been improved, so let's take a look. And look at this, we went from 76 frames per second up to 108. 42% improvement when we're adding ray tracing.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how much ray tracing you actually get in Solar Bay. I think the devs themselves said that it's a pretty light RT test, very much designed for mobile. I also don't know if you can actually properly leverage the RT performance without some software optimizations. We see that, for example, right now with the PS5 Pro, where RT in optimized games is legit like twice to more times faster than the regular PS5, but then in non-optimized games it just scales with the regular 30 to 40% improvement that we see from raster increases. So there is a new Blender version, for example, right around the corner. Maybe we'll see better optimized, I apologize. Maybe we'll see better optimized RT usage there, but yeah, don't bet on like RT becoming magically twice as fast in every test. Would you buy 3 or 4 year Apple Care on laptop? I didn't. Like, this is the question. Like, would I? But granted, given my very good experience with Apple devices over the past, I've actually not bought Apple Care for years. Knock on wood, I won't need it. But yeah, it's a little bit complicated because I technically understand, of course, how important a single product might be, and paying a little bit extra for like just the peace of mind of a proper warranty is cool. But to me, at this point, if my MacBook Pro really breaks like really heavily and there's some like $500-600 repair cost, honestly not sure if I wouldn't upgrade instead. But I honestly couldn't tell you. Hope I don't have to find out the bad way.
To the mix. I mean, that is just blowing my mind, the value you get for this new machine. And next I want to test out Blender because the graphics performance is so good on this machine. Right away, even loading up the project is quicker on the M4 Pro. We have everything loaded up. We're using GPU cycles rendering, and let's go ahead and start this. And the M4 Pro is flying here. And here we go. We have 49 seconds compared to pretty much minute 7. So that's about 37% faster
That's not how scaling works in a graph.
for this project. And if you're doing a lot of rendering, I mean, you can actually use the M4 Pro for some more serious work. And now I have Adobe Lightroom Classic opened up right here, the newest version with a bunch of high resolution.
Looking at UE5 doing Lumen and NL tests, ray tracing isn't anywhere close to NVIDIA. Depends on what test you're looking at. What UE5 game is even optimized for the Mac? Also, no, the ray tracing on macOS on the latest Mac chips is definitely close to RTX 4000. When you look, for example, in Blender, the reason why Apple sucks there is the optics API. It's just so well optimized. But when we'll actually get to even some native games, you will see like, and even some non-native tests where the M4 Max delivers surprisingly good results. The question is, what are you comparing? Because like, you cannot leave like power consumption entirely out of the equation. Like if an RTX 4080 consumes 140 watts, while an M4 Max GPU will not max out at 50, and then the entire SoC consumes half the performance of just the RTX 4080, plus the CPU to handle everything would add like another 40 watts or something like that. So you're closer to a 200 watt system power consumption versus like an 80 watt system power consumption. You really cannot just say, oh, they're not close. Like when you're saying it not feels like it's RTX 2060 era. There's just not enough on macOS that actually has RT. Look into like the Resident Evil games that didn't even port their RT capabilities to Mac. That's the issue. AV Mail, my iPhone suddenly crashed. I have to be honest, the customer support was way better than I was expecting. Wait, what did you expect? Bad customer support from Apple? They answered really quickly and all called back when they said Apple's customer support is great, but it's not just that Apple's direct customer support is great. Like I feel like the people covering Apple tech, just from the sometimes they have like a higher quality standard because iPhones are the more expensive devices. So that's where you usually get the more qualified employees. But also because there are fewer devices, fewer like operating system versions and stuff like that, it just makes it easier for people to quickly learn about all that stuff that can happen and give you good support.
Images. All of these have effects included on the raw files. Let's go ahead and export these. These are going to use the CPU and the GPU. As you guys could see on the M4 Max, CPU's maxed out, graphics is really being pushed hard. And man, I almost missed it there. Oh my goodness. Wow, the M4 Pro flew through that. Guys, that was 25 seconds compared to 40. That's not twice as fast, but that is getting close.
It's
when you're pairing the extra
faster.
CPU power and the extra GPU power, the extra memory bandwidth, the extra RAM, I mean, that is crazy. I think I'm gonna have to make this test a lot harder because it's just going so quick now. If you're gonna be doing a lot of photo editing, man, this computer is gonna handle it no problem. And now getting into video editing, I'm gonna do a few tests. I know you guys wanna ask about smoothness, and in all reality, even the M4 can handle this no problem for your typical 4K workflow. I have some effects here, some LUTs, film grain. That's more than a lot of people do for video editing, and you have no issues. Now I will do something tougher, but first I wanna export this and see how the encoders compare. We saw the M4 actually had faster encoders than the M3, M2, and M1, which were really the same. What about the M4 Pro? Let's go ahead and take a look. And just like the M4, the encoders have been improved. It took 2 minutes compared to 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Not a huge difference, but it's the first time since the M1 that we're getting that improvement. Of course, if you get the M4 Max, you get dual encoders.
Yeah, there's nothing crazy to react to. I didn't expect the H.264 and H.265 engines to get any reasonable improvements anymore. I thought that whatever Apple needed in raw power for those media encoders, they would just make up for like a more GPU and CPU boost. But I mean, great for them.
Make it even faster. And here I have some 4K 60 Canon RAW footage, applied color corrections. We have a LUT on here. And as you see, both of them are playing it very well. My Mac Pro could actually not even play this. So even for tough footage, both are handling this fine. The thing is the M4 Pro is only using 39% of CPU, 60% graphics to do so. So I think what I could do for you guys is a timeline render. Let's go ahead and hit start. I'll start my timer here. And that is because for timeline smoothness, it really depends on what footage you're using, how many effects you have.
True, this is what I also said
into it. And I can make
about comparing
timeline
export
very
times to the
Both these
M2
systems chop
Ultra.
up.
Sometimes
but in reality,
playback will actually
if you have one of these machines, they're gonna
smoother,
do a great
even
job.
though
As you guys can see here, the
export
M4
might
Pro
still
is
be better on
smoking
an
it.
Ultra chip.
Wow.
Yeah, when
that
I was
is a
buying
huge difference.
earbuds
So if
in
your
airport,
system
did
is
you treated
struggling,
me
your
differently
timeline
when I
slows
chose
down,
AirPods Pro 2
yeah,
over
get one of these
Sony?
new machines.
The Sony
Dang,
model I'm
okay.
looking for, they don't
This
have.
thing got done
Yeah,
while
that
the M3
happens
Pro wasn't even
sometimes,
at 50%
unfortunately. I
yet
wish it
with this
wasn't
5-minute
that way.
timeline.
I still think
Looks like
that
it picked up at the end
consumer
there, and
choice
the final time is
matters.
1 minute and 5 seconds for the M3 Pro and 45 seconds for the M4 Pro. That's the combination of the CPU and the GPU. I mean, the M4 Pro is an absolute beast. You can edit red raw footage on the system, no problem, unless you're doing some crazy complex things, which maybe the M4 Max is gonna be better for that, but this is just crazy impressive. And now I have Cinebench opened up right here. We're gonna max out these CPU cores. We have a 10-minute stress test, so let's go ahead and get started. I wanna see the performance and how hot this gets and how loud. Now I have MX Power Gadget.
There's a reason why I did really want to watch this till the end. I have not watched this video, guys. This went live just when I started streaming. But the point is, I do have always some decent coverage on thermals and stuff before the community really starts to like piss their pants.
Over here, and wow, 39, almost hit 40 watts here compared to 22. Geez Louise. Let me scoot this down over here so you guys can compare just that graph there. So that's a total package power. CPU's at 40 right there, hit 40 compared to 23. Yeah, the M4 Pro is using a lot more power.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. And that would put the M4 Max in the 50-watt territory for the CPU alone.
Mentioned we have
For peak CPU tasks, of course. If you're looking, for example, how the CPU behaves during a game where most of the wattage will come from the GPU, you're probably not going to utilize more than 6 to 8 P cores, probably only one of those running even close to its maximum frequency. This is where the benefits like would just really pile up of like newer node, newer architecture, optimized for higher clocks, but maybe not needing them as much. While here, this is just a raw test. You're definitely seeing the power consumption. This is why it will be similar to like the M3 Max. Don't forget, while it does have like some differences architecturally and stuff like that, N3E is not technically designed to be that much better than N3B. The main benefit of N3E was that it's easier to produce, especially for like super huge markets than N3B.
5 performance cores compared to 8 and higher clock speeds as well. Now looking at the temps, I don't know if this is exactly correct, but we did hit 108 pretty quick, 95 here compared to 82. Definitely it is heating up quicker, and let me go ahead and open up my fan program here. Unfortunately, we don't have an update yet for all the CPU temperatures perfectly, but we can still look at the fans. And here, we're at pretty much idle, while here the fans are already kicking up. So I'm guessing the M4 Pro machine, we have the same fans, it's gonna run hotter and louder because of all the extra performance. True. Now, as you guys can see here, the M4 Pro already lowered down.
This is why, even more so than in prior years, I do recommend the binned version of the M4 Pro. It will be like, unless you can also leverage like 20% more GPU power, something like that. But for most people, the binned version is now well beyond more than good enough.
Clock speed.
Quite honestly, I am surprised that Apple didn't go with like 6P plus 6E cores in the binned version, and then 8 plus 6 cores with 8P cores in the fully enabled one. To see them go all the way up to 10 P cores and reduce the E core count, honestly, while I'm obviously not against it, because in software you can like tune those 2 extra P cores in a way, I honestly think for most people probably keeping 6 E cores was a very, very good thing. And I mean, Apple did give like the base M4 6E cores, so they didn't hate that choice themselves. So it's a very interesting change from M3 Pro to M4 Pro. Do you think M4 Studio with Max chip would be announced in June, July? There was rumoring that it would come even earlier than that. But obviously I cannot give you like a month or something like that. Like no promises here. But yeah, if it was announced in June, July, then it would be coming in the second half officially. So my assumption is, given that it's supposed to still come out in the first half, it's more like an April launch. Like, especially if you're only looking for the Max chip, which I'm not sure if the Ultra could come in later. That I could see. Like maybe Apple in March or April introduces like a MacBook Air with M4, an iPad Air M3 with like the newer Magic Keyboard support, and then a Mac Studio. Who knows?
So we're at 34 watts or so. The M3 Pro actually went up a little bit, so it's slowly tapering up. And as far as heat, I mean, they're actually averaging similar now, but it's not only the CPU that can get hot, it's the whole chassis that will get hot, and you could have to lower down the performance a little bit. So clock speeds now, we have 3.58 compared to 3.67 for the performance cores, 3.64. They're actually gonna even out.
M3 wasn't binned. I guess if you mean like 5 P cores versus 6, but yeah, I can understand, of course, if N3B turned out like less efficient in their testing than they hoped, then it did make sense to add extra efficiency cores to add at least some performance. And then once they saw, oh, large dies have like weird yields, let us have the M3 Pro be built like with less P cores and actually less GPU cores even, so that way we can at least make sure that the M3 Pro is truly mass producible.
Now in clock speeds.
And then let us go completely apeshit on the M3 Max, because that one is so niche we can kind of afford to do with it whatever we want.
But of course, we still have those extra cores. All right, guys, now I have my thermal camera here looking at the M3 Pro. We're at 34 degrees Celsius. M4 Pro, 38, right over there. So yes, this thing is hotter, runs louder, and it does slow down. We need more powerful fans in the system. And while this is finishing up, I have to say, if you're thinking about getting an M4 Max and a 14-inch, don't do that. I would put money down that the 16-inch M4 Pro would actually beat out a 14-inch M4 Max in a variety of tests. We actually saw that with the M3 version. Now, this actually gets hotter than it did before. So a lot of performance, it's still gonna spank this one, but we're starting to see the limitation once again of having a thin and small computer. And holy moly, guys, this is crazy. We have 882 points for M3 Pro and 1,324 points for M4 Pro. So even with the slowing down of the chip clocking down, that's 50% faster. That is insane. Absolutely insane performance difference. And if it didn't slow down, wow. I mean, even with that, I don't even care. That year-over-year improvement is ridiculous, and it would smash other computers, even more expensive ones from previous years. Wow. And with all those tests done after hours of doing this, what's the battery life like? Well, I think it's gonna be interesting. Let's look at the M3 Pro. We are at 38% now. Of course, we were really pushing these systems. 38% battery life, that's good. The M4 Pro, 29%. So this is actually rare that this happens. Usually the new system will use less power, but not.
But what is interesting, again, Apple does actually promise battery life increases for stuff like web browsing and video watching. So when it comes to utilizing very few cores or clocks at like decent clock speeds, not at the highest ones, you are seeing an efficiency gain, because then the chip operates at a more advantageous parts of its efficiency curve. When it comes to raw power consumption, and especially time clocked power consumption, like not saying, oh, I need a task done and I can get that task done in like 40% less time, right? But I run the chip at higher power consumption. Instead, if you say, oh, I need that chip to run full speed for half an hour, then yeah, that full speed will obviously consume more power. It is an interesting trade-off. Again, this is why I'm saying the 14-inch version definitely is kind of happy with the M4 Pro this generation. Max chips for the 14-inch version are questionable until we maybe get like a huge efficiency gain again with like 2 nanometer or something like that, or who knows, maybe at that point it will be 16A with backside power delivery. But for now, unless you really need that extra GPU power, and you will not limit that GPU power by a lot of CPU power consumption, simultaneously, get the M4 Pro rather than the M4 Max. And yes, most people should still be happy even with the regular M4
this year, and that is only because of how much more performance we're getting and how much more GPU cores we have, how much more CPU performance cores we have to actually ditch some efficiency cores to give us more performance cores, and I will take that trade-off any day. The battery life is still excellent. It did get worse, but the performance you're getting...
It did not actually get worse. In actual regular usage, it is actually better.
Really incredible.
And I've seen those tests.
Guys, so there you guys go. You saw all the...
Okay, so that's Max Tech here. Let's actually go to what I did promise you all along, which is Geekerwan's review. I did download their Mac Mini 5-minute video. No idea what that is. I guess 4,000 means like Geekbench 6. I'll have to put them at like 1.15, and we'll need subtitles. And again, I have not actually pre-watched that video in full. I've seen like some select tests and I've shared them out. So this will be a new experience for me. Guys, we're almost 2 hours into the stream. We have more people watching than we have likes. Please leave a like. Helps tremendously, helps us attract more people. Share the video to anybody who think might enjoy it. Comment live. I love interacting with a lively live chat. Of course, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet done so. And if you want to support this channel directly, look at the beginning of this live chat. Look at Max, Maximus, and Steve, who are also YouTube channel members. Wing Wing, which is also a way to support this channel. How they have left super chats and birthday wishes. And of course, you can also become a supporter over on Patreon in addition to all those other methods. Without further ado, let's get started with Geekerwan or Geekerwan.
苹果终于在 iPad Pro 搭载 M4 的半年之后，更新了搭载 M4 系列处理器的 Max 产品线。我们今天就来看看 M4 家族的两位大哥 M4 Pro 和 M4 Max 有多强。
By the way, this is why I'm telling people who were like really worried about M4 Pro in the Mac Mini. And like when you just look at height, like sure you can spread out a lot here on the MacBook Pro, but the Mac Mini, especially, like don't forget here they would even have to put in a Max chip. That running the Pro in there here is not crazy.
以及很关键的一件事，他们能打游戏吗？打游戏到底有体验如何呢？今天我们就来好好测试测试吧。我们测试的两台机型分别是搭载 M4 Pro 48G 内存的 Mac Mini， 以及搭载 M4 Max 128G 内存的顶配 MacBook Pro 16。相比较外观已经3年没换过的 MacBook Pro 啊 ，Mac Mini 这次可谓是历史上升级最大的一次，大幅减小的体积让它看起来精致了很多。这也是10年来 Mac Mini 第一次在形态上做更新啊，这看起来完全就是一台浓缩版的。
One thing that I actually saw, and again, if you follow me on Twitter, you can see that stuff. I actually went back to Apple's 2012 Mac Mini keynote, and they were talking how it consumed only 11 watts. At idle, and now we see tests that this Mac Mini consumes like 1.6, 1.8 watts at idle. So we are talking about well over 6-7x improvements in efficiency here. Just pointing out, a lot of stuff has actually happened over the last decade that we might not even be consciously aware of, but there are so many stacked up improvements. And of course, if you want something that is absolutely not thermally restrained, wait until Mac Studio with M4 Ultra. And if you want to go completely crazy, and if you like rely on like a lot of PCIe based storage and stuff like that, that's where you wait until the Mac Pro. I'm sure it's possible to squeeze the Mini even smaller if the power supply is external. Yeah, that of course. Not only do you save space, but even more importantly, you take a lot of heat away from the internal system. So technically you could even cheap out more on the thermals overall. You also like lose one layer of internal shielding, but why would you make it look less refined by losing out on that internal power supply?
The Mac Studio 嘛 ，M4 Pro 版本的机身背面搭载了3个雷电5，而且不像很多迷你主机的外置电源 ，Mac Mini 的小机身里还塞进了电源。
And by the way, that Qualcomm thing, that one doesn't actually exist anymore. It was canceled for developers, so they couldn't just get the thermals right in this device while Apple has this device. So, just saying.
的电源啊，因此我也很好奇，这么小的空间真的能压住 M4 Pro 这样的处理器吗？最关键的是，这次全系16G 内存起步了，加上最近的国补或者是教育优惠，一台16G 内存的 M4 Mac Mini 甚至3000多块钱就能带回家了。第一次感觉到苹果居然和性价比扯得上关系啊！所以我们呢也买了一台入门版的 M4 Mac Mini， 过2天到货了以后呢，就来给大家测测看。那说到 M4
I don't know why I
Pro，
just talked like Uncle Roger. Maybe because I heard Chinese, which doesn't even make sense because Uncle Roger doesn't speak Chinese in his videos. I guess that's racist. Yeah. I guess that explains why that 5-minute video exists.
哇，就必须得聊聊它令人印象深刻的规格。和 M3 Pro 相较于 M3 Max 的巨大鸿沟是这个。
M3 Max, M4. Yeah, we talked about all of
M4
that.
Pro 的 CPU 部分和 M4 Max 差别并不大，只少了2颗大核。这个规格甚至已经直逼 M3 Max 了。
One thing I am surprised is to not see Apple just out of fun add like 2 efficiency cores to the M4 Max. It wouldn't really change anything. but it just would be such a weird lineup at that point when it comes to E-cores, where the M4 and the M4 Max share the same amount of E-cores.
起来好像只是从12核增加到了14核，实则啊是从6P 加6E 增加到了10P 加4E 啊，多了整整4个大核，这让我对它的 CPU 性能非常好奇。GPU 性能则比较常规，那么20CU 的规格相比较于 M3 Pro 增加的不多。那内存带宽呢，则相比上代几乎直接翻倍啊。那这是因为呢这一代使用了8533频率的，相当于 DDR5 4通道的256位内存所带来的，比起上代的6400速率192位的位宽提升同样巨大。那 M4 Max 呢，相比之下就没有 M4 Pro 那么亮眼啊。的确，上代的 M3 Max 已经非常强了，M4 Max 并没有做规格上的改动，只是给 M3 Max 换上了 M4 家族的新架构，核心数目呢和上代保持一致，只能算是一次常规迭代。内存呢则是升级到了相当于8通道的512位8533兆速率的内存，带宽呢超过了500G 每秒，比现成4Lit的内存带宽还高啊，相当吓人。M4 家族的核心架构呢，我们已经在 iPad Pro 的评测视频当中为大家详细介绍过，实宽的巨型架构带来了目前业界最高的 IPC 表现。M4 的高频特色呢，也继承给了两位大哥啊，两个处理器的单核加速频率都可以跑到4.5G 赫，满载的时候呢 ，M4 Max 的大核可以跑到3.88G 赫，M4 Pro 稍低一点，可以跑到3.85G 赫，两者的小核都可以跑到2.6G 赫。
Those can be just like, I'm not even sure if those are real differences between Max and Pro. Those can be almost like run-to-run variants, like those few megahertz. It really isn't a game changer.
这个频率表现甚至已经没比英特尔和 AMD 的移动处理器低多少了，再加上极高的 IPC， 最终就带来了非常可怕的单核性能。要知道，我们之前用液氮给995。
Okay, guys, you see something sticking out here, right? And that is that. Jesus Christ. I'm so sorry. Okay, so you might think, wait, why is the 9950X, which we saw losing in Cinebench and Geekbench, right? Like, why is it suddenly has results, one that is below the M4P core and one that is above? Well, you look at this. Yep, they made it run not at the promised 5.6, 5.7 gigahertz max clock speed, which, by the way, yes, I understand 5.7 gigahertz is very much reachable on the 9950X, but don't forget that other Zen 5 CPUs that are lower clocked and therefore lower, actually suitable for lower powered devices. I'll just find it for you. Let's look at the 9700X. At its peak clock speed. So 5.525 gigahertz, right? So, and then the 9950X is at 5.7, right? So they don't even seem to have a great CPU if they can only max it out at around 5.6. So yeah, running this at 6.7 gigahertz, it's not just an overclock, it's unstable. That kind of shit, you're happy if you can run one benchmark with it. In games, it will be an absolute nightmare. So unless you're optimizing that for one specific task and you check the voltage for it and everything else, you just non-stop use it almost like a server farm for it, which again, that efficiency loss will be absolutely not worth it. But yeah, this is the meme that I already mentioned, right? It's invincible meme mimic. Right, it's that meme. Look at what they need to mimic a fraction of our power, right? And because they can fly and have like super strength, and we humans need to rely on F-35s. Just saying. They needed a 6.7 gigahertz Zen 5 desktop chip that spreads itself out over two CPU chiplets to slightly beat the M4P core. Spraying liquid nitrogen 24/7 just for that 6.7. I don't know if you can get it in like a liquid cooling. I doubt you can get 6.7. It's liquid cooling is more for like a 3 to 4% stable, nice overclock with great thermals. It's like, did they really do liquid nitrogen here? That would have been quite insane.
50叉超频到
Oh
6
yeah,
点
they actually confirmed it. I guess you read it quicker than I did.
7 G 可怕的单核性能。要知道，我们之前用
You
液
must
氮
know
给
that
追
we
逐
used
50叉超
liquid
频，
nitrogen to overclock the 9950X.
到了
Yeah.
6.7 G 赫，才在 Spec 2017里勉强打过了 iPad Pro 上的 M4啊，和 X86 目前最强的995。
And by the way, this is the wait, what is 4.47? I know like 4.41 for the base M4, and I know M4 4.51 for the M4 Pro and Max. So like their clock speeds are usually some of the weirdest shit they mention, but that's maybe all that was available for Spec 2017. I know that sometimes you cannot do like you cannot boost clocks by like 0.01 hertz gigahertz, right? Usually the intervals are more like 10 megahertz or even 100 depending on the task. So maybe Apple has like a 30 megahertz interval or something like that, but then here they are capable of giving you 4.46 and here 4.47. So apparently you can do just 10 megahertz. So I'm just a little confused. Jan Hendrik saying alles gut zum Geburtstag. Vielen Dank.
50叉和 285K 墨屏
And
的
yeah,
墨
and
屏
then the 285K just sucks, which is Intel's latest and greatest.
就是这种结果啊。由于 M4 Pro 和 M4 Max 并没有架构上的更新，频率上也和 M4 保持了一致。那单核性能和架构呢，我们就不再重复测试了。咱们直接来看生产力性能测试。
Oh
首先是
no!
渲染
Wait, he totally missed out on it having 10% on it having 100 megahertz higher clock speeds.
的 Cinebench
You should have rerun that test. I mean, if you bothered to make the 9950X to test it under liquid nitrogen, really you couldn't. That's disappointing.
在 Cinebench 2024当中 ，M4 家族2颗处理器跑出单核接近100。
Okay, so I have no idea what they're doing with the cooling. Those are some of the highest Cinebench results I've seen. But yeah, again, these chips, those are 16P cores on desktops. That is 8P cores plus 16E cores, no hyperthreading. Habe mich nun doch durchgedrungen und den Basis-Mac. So Jan bought the base Mac Mini with M4 and a $100 Full HD monitor and a Magic Mouse and keyboard used in green. That's an interesting combo. Let me know how you feel about it once you get it. That screen might hold you back a little bit in your ability to fully experience everything macOS has to offer.
190分的离谱成绩啊！这个成绩比目前 X86 阵营最高的 285K 还要高出25%左右啊！更别提移动端处理器了。那多核方面呢 ，M4 Max 跑出了2000分出头的成绩 ，M4 Pro 也能跑出1700分以上的成绩。看起来2颗 CPU 的差距的确不算很大，而且 M4 Pro 在这里已经超越了上代的满血 M3 Max， 表现相当不错。值得一提的是啊 ，M4 2颗处理器在 Cinebench 2024的 GPU 测试里表现也不错，尤其是 M4 Pro 啊，这个性能已经接近 M2 Ultra 了。老一点的 Cinebench 2023当中 ，M4 家族2颗处理器依然跑出超。
I don't comment on Cinebench R23. And sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad for Apple. Doesn't matter to me. I know it's just an outdated benchmark for a current version of a more GPU focused task. So I barely tolerate Cinebench as a CPU benchmark. I definitely don't tolerate an old gen version of Cinebench.
超高的单核成绩啊！多核成绩方面 ，M4 Max 跑出了接近28000分的峰值成绩，相比较于 M3 Max 继续稳步提升。M4 Pro 也跑出了23400分的成绩，几乎和满血版的 M3 Max 一致啊！看到这个成绩，我非常好奇。
Yeah, I fully understand. I'm not saying the monitor choice is bad. I know sometimes you just need a monitor, right? If I were to buy myself a Mac Mini right now, I would probably go somewhat cheaper on a monitor too, because right now there's nothing on the market that I would just need to own, right? So yeah, and if the Mac Mini is a little bit like of an impulse purchase, I fully understand why you would feel like, you know what, any monitor will kind of do. You can also connect it to your TV sometimes, depending on your needs. So yeah, that was absolutely not like talking down to you or anything. I really hope you enjoy your purchase.
明年可能要推出的 M4 Ultra 甚至更大的处理器到底能有多强？那么在7 zip 压缩和解压测试里面 ，M4 Max 比 M3 Max 强了不少。除了 CPU 性能呢，这里面还有一个非常重要的影响因素，就是内存子系统的性能。
It's interesting they don't have M3 Pro here, which is again what I've said time and time again now is the most interesting generational uplift in Apple's like M4 family. But again, very close. M4 Pro, 2 M3 Max, Cinebench, 7-zip, very multi-threaded, so it benefits here. You get like technically even the 2 extra M3 Max P cores, but yeah, very, very impressive results. You can see that at that point, even though here it's pretty good overall, you don't get too crazy of scaling here. M3 Max versus M4 Max.
最终 M4 Pro 的测试结果已经接近 M3 Max 了，进步不小。M4 Max 则是大幅领先于 M3 Max 啊。那接下来是 Blender， 我们使用 4.2 版本加上官方的 benchmark 工具进行测试。CPU 测试当中 ，M4 Pro 几乎已经跑出了和满血版 M3 Max 相当的成绩。GPU 方面 ，M4 Max 比 M3 Max 提升不小，M4 Pro 呢则几乎是 M4 Max 的一半性能。那因为 Blender 这样的
Okay, so scaling makes sense. We once again see that the M4 Pro, well, GPU scaling makes sense. In CPU, we see how the M4 Pro competes nicely versus the M3 Max. Very, very good patterns to find.
主要依赖的是 GPU 的光追性能。那这代 GPU 最重要的改进就是光追能力。那这个
This is also like some of you said, by the way, that it is like RTX 2060 GPU level. Nope, it's not. Like, unless of course you want to compare like the Pro chips, which again use like a fraction of the power of like such a GPU. If you look at something like a 4070 or 4080 mobile, you are above, you're at that level or above that with M3 and M4 Max.
Max 的一半性能。那因为 Blender 这样的离线渲染器主要依赖的是
And again, there is still a chance that once a newer Blender version comes around, maybe they learn to better work with Apple's new ray tracing engine, and we see nicer gains.
追性能。那这代 GPU 最重要的改进就是光追能力。那这个差距和同是离线渲染器测试的 Cinebench 2024的 GPU 成绩也比较接近。我们还测试了 Blender 的宝马27 GPU 场景啊，在这个场景里面，新的 GPU 比上一代直接。
Yeah, okay, 50% gain here is not too bad. NVIDIA uses optics here, so again, anybody who was saying that Apple is like completely left in the dust at this point by NVIDIA, and I said this is not a bad thing here, by the way, for Apple to beat NVIDIA. This is a 2-year-old card at this point. Apple should be competitive with that, even with their much lower power consumption.
提升了50%，也远远超过了407移动版的水平。接下来是 GPU benchmark 3D Mark。Still No My Lag 当中 ，M4 Max 相较于 M3 Max 有小幅提升啊，M4 Pro 就几乎是 M4 Max 一半出头的性能。在这种无光追测试里面 ，M4 Max 的 GPU 提升比较有限，基本上性能增长呢主要来自于更高的 GPU 频率和内存带宽。咱们再来看看 Adobe 全家桶和达芬奇当中的性能，在 Photoshop 里面 ，M4 Max 的成绩提升相当可观，因为 Photoshop。
Okay, so we see once again that lead in Puget Bench. Where just I've informed you guys several times about that. Photoshop is very, very single core heavy, so in that regard, getting like almost the same performance level of M4 Pro and M4 Max makes sense. M3 Max, of course, not too far behind. There are some limits to how Photoshop scales. No idea why the 185H is just terrible here.
是一个非常吃单核性能的项目，在这里，即便是小弟 M4 Pro 也轻松干掉了 M3 Max。M4 系列2颗 CPU 表现都很强 ，Premiere 里 CPU 的多核性能以及 GPU 的加速性能都非常关键。因此在这里呢 ，M4 Max 和 M4 Pro 拉开了非常明显的差距。M3 Max 呢则介于两者之间。M4 Pro 的 GPU 规格差异。
I assume this utilizes the GPU because that would explain the M3 Max leading the M4 Pro. Not sure actually. The difference in GPU specific. Okay, I should always wait for whatever next sentence to pops up because it answers my question. Yeah, that also explains, by the way, why the 4070 was like delivering decent results here, right? Because obviously in that now it can use the GPU acceleration here.
性呢都非常关键。因此在这里呢，M4 Max
I personally tolerate Blender Benchmark more because it's optimized for native silicon GPU now. Also, yeah, next version should improve Blender ray tracing further. It works on M1 too somehow. Yeah, like for Apple, it's really like the fully integrated SoC solution. The fact that they've always had a generous amount of cash on it. Technically, there's a lot of stuff that is very advantageous for ray tracing. Right, ray tracing has some CPU overheads. That's very easy to fix with how Apple's GPU is run. Ray tracing is like pretty bandwidth heavy. In this case, cache is actually bandwidth. So while even before Apple introduced hardware accelerated ray tracing, their architecture for like a non-hardware accelerated ray tracing was by far the best. Like, similar to how I would argue that AMD had pretty good not hardware accelerated ray tracing in the RTX 5000 series, but it just so happened that, of course, by that point, NVIDIA had started giving you hardware accelerated ray tracing, so that made AMD look really bad by comparison.
Max 和 M4 Pro 拉开了非常明显的差距。M3 Max 呢则介于两者之间。M4 Pro 的 GPU 规格差异在这里是造成这种差异的关键因素啊。A 当中 CPU 的差距就被显著拉开了 ，M4 Max 一骑绝尘，跑出了将近2000分的成绩，这个成绩比台式机的9950叉和28。
Oh wow, that's the desktop 4090 losing in After Effects? Is that test CPU limited somehow? Why would it be?
5K 还要强不少。
What? That's insane. How is Apple doing that? Is that just the benefit of the unified architecture and just the fact that CPU and GPU have like very little crosstalks? Also, like they're always like able to work on one thing? That's insane. The M4 Pro coming close here to the like, and then the laptop parts are just left in the dust? What? In After Effects? Is that really how high it goes? There's an official Puget Bench database. So maybe they got like wrong test. Puget Bench, After Effects, RTX 4090. Content creation review. Do I please? Ah, Jesus Christ. Puget Bench list, After Effects. Maybe Apple just optimized to the benchmark. We need real life test. What do you mean the benchmark? After Effects is a real life application. Puget Bench is just a benchmark that utilizes those apps. It does not give you a somehow unique task unless it's somehow an artificial test that needs more than 24 gigabytes of memory, which again for After Effects wouldn't even be completely impossible. But Puget Bench for After, there is no way for Apple to optimize for this task more than the other guys are already doing. Like there is just this inherent misunderstanding. Like the companies cheating more on benchmarks are the companies that actually, and it's not because Apple is more fair here. It's because those companies have more to lose if they lose in benchmarks. Apple customers will keep buying Apple devices if they lose After Effects. Believe me, it's when NVIDIA starts losing to AMD that they will actually worry about losing market share. And AMD will worry about gaining any market share in the GPU space. So I'm very, very... do they not have, like... Okay, so Puget Bench for After Effects, system specs. Let me just look for the 1490. Yeah, 1534. And here, theirs is actually 1757. So who knows? Also, if it is about memory sizes, then Mac Unified Memory has advantages. 4090 is 24 gigs. Of course, here, yeah, that one is. But they said that the M4 Pro is 48 gigabytes, which still would be a lot more than the RTX 4090. I had, by the way, a guy on Twitter today try to teach me that you can fully leverage CPU RAM or system RAM for GPU tasks, which I know you can use it almost like swap and overhead, but it's like an order of a magnitude slower. It's so stupid when people make those points. Yeah, maybe, but like, really, would it really be above 24 gigabytes?
M4 Pro 则是跑出了和 M3 Max 接近的程度。
So I was gonna say, like, these tests actually show it faster. So, but that is 4090 at the 3900K. So 4900K and the 285K could actually be faster. Yeah, but that's pretty crazy if everything else created equal. And again, those are 64 gigabyte system. That is 128 gigabyte of system memory. Granted, it's not the fastest memory here. Probably if you utilize like what, 7,000 megahertz memory, maybe. But here you have like 256 gigabytes of system memory. Like, and it's running on the Threadripper Pro, so if you could actually leverage some extra CPU cores for that task, I just have to know, M4 Max, what are the results here? Yeah, those are actually all that high. I wonder if it's all coming from Geekerwan, those results. Damn, that's insane shit. After Effects CPU or GPU intensive. I mean, I know it's GPU, but let me just heavily on Unity rather than graphics. After Effects, is GPU or CPU more important for After Effects? It's more reliant on the speed of your CPU. Okay. I always thought that After Effects is like, maybe that's just this CPU. Like, it does have GPU acceleration. I'm so confused by these results. But yeah, I mean, good for Apple in After Effects, I guess.
比较符合这几款 CPU 的理论性能差距。最后，我们还测试了达芬奇当中的性能，和 PR 里一样。
Do research into AE bottlenecks. DaVinci Resolve, this is where GPU comes in handy. Those results make a lot of sense to me. I mean, granted, I still would expect larger gains, but yeah.
剪辑软件对于 GPU 的性能还是非常看重的，因此 M4 Pro
Yeah, After Effects is CPU. I guess that makes some. But even here, the gains for raw GPU performance on the 4090 is like. And I mean, yeah, I know DaVinci Resolve is not a GPU-only test, but it's very highly GPU accelerated. So Apple really is pulling off some crazy shit here. And they did already with the M3 Max, to be honest.
再次吃了 GPU 性能的亏。
And yeah, by the way, this is, if you're using mobile, I'm not even sure if maybe there is any, like, they don't mention if that mobile device is held back in any way by, like, performance profiles or whatever, but like Apple, for the power consumption that they have here, just crazy good
落后于
results.
M3 Max 不少。那至于 M4 Max 呢，则又一次跑到了9950X 和285K 的性能级别，确实很强。那么 benchmark 和生产力测试做下来呢 ，M4 Pro 确实表现出了相当扎实的性能提升啊，在以 CPU 为主的测试项目里，甚至可以基本上和上代的顶配 M3 Max 打个有来有回。那 GPU 呢，由于硬件规格还是和顶配的 M3 Max 有不小的差距。那至于 M4 Max 啊，作为硬件规格不变，主要提升架构的新品，它的提升幅度基本就来自于新架构和新工艺所带来的提升了。那它呢，就是目前最强的 Mac 平台的处理器。那么有人可能要说了，你这 M4 Max 这么强？ 反正对我来说也没啥用啊，Mac 嘛又打不了什么游戏啊，我要这么强性能有啥用啊？
Yep, that's a deflection you hear often on the internet.
你还真别说，现在的 Mac 打游戏不仅能打，还相当能打。今年 WWDC 之后，苹果更新了用于转移 Windows 平台游戏的 GPTK 2.0，目前官网最新的版本为 GPTK 2.0 Beta 3啊。这 GPTK 2.0最关键的提升在于，它已经可以转移 AVX 指令集了。 因此，它大幅提升了 Mac 在转移游戏时的性能和兼容性表现。现在确实可以说，大多数 Windows 平台上面能运行的游戏 都可以顺利在 Mac 上运行了，甚至于它的游戏兼容性比 X Elite 平台的 Windows 机型还要更好啊。那为了能让你准确了解它的游戏内容大概是个什么段位，我给一台 M4 Max 的 MacBook Pro 找了一台长得很像的 Windows 游戏版来对比啊，这是台搭载
And Oni-chan, you were sold apparently by the benchmarks we were analyzing to get the M4, probably M4 Pro, and spec up to 48 gigs of memory. You mentioned that you're a developer or something like that. So yeah, if you can leverage it, all the power to you.
只不过这颜色嘛，这 MacBook Pro 这次怎么反而成暗黑幻16 Air 了啊？倒反天罡了，属于是。我们总共选择了5款游戏啊，包括目前已经是 Mac 平台原生的游戏的《博德之门3》《生化危机4》，目前要通过转运行，但不久之后就要原生到 Mac 平台的《赛博朋克2077》。
Yeah, why are you testing RE4? At least test like RE7. You can test RE4 in a month.
以及纯转译的《艾尔登法环》和《黑神话：悟空》。我们会通过它们来一窥现在的 Mac 到底在游戏里有怎样性能表现，到底能不能打游戏啊？首先，咱们来看看原生组《博德之门3》当中。
Okay, BG3 beating out the 4070 across the M3 Max, and that is a 34% increase in performance. Let me just do the math. 77 divided by 60. By 60. Okay, that's a 28% improvement. Why did I think it was over a third? I don't know why. I guess my brain malfunctioned quickly.
M4 Max 的帧数表现有点惊人啊。
This is one thing that, and I did comment on it on Twitter or something like that. I wish we had the power consumption for this difference. Like, how much more power does this combination of like what is technically the most efficient laptop chip right now draw over Apple's M4 Pro, especially in the MacBook Pro?
1440P 下最高画质跑出了77帧的平均帧，这个成绩比 M3 Max 高了20%左右。离谱的是，它比4070的幻16 Air 高了将近30%的帧数。
Even like better relative performance if you go by 1080p, and I mean by better in terms of like more efficient because that would leverage the CPU more, and Apple has like that huge efficiency gain in the CPU.
M4 Pro 的性能和规格一致，基本上就是 M4 Max 的一半。而当我们进一步降低分辨率，1080P 下的表现就更佳。
Oh, they actually did test what 1080p. So yeah, the gain is actually larger now. So I was correct, and I definitely did not pre-watch that part. 105 divided by 65. Yeah, now we're looking at a 62% gain. That's over double the gain that we saw in the 1440p test. So I guess you could really see like some of the like the raw size of the 4070 as a GPU here. That's a big boost here. And you probably should play it at 1080p and then lock it, if you can, to like something like 80. You would have such a smooth and efficient gaming performance. That sounds so good. Oh yeah, AVX2 was the bottleneck of running many modern Windows games in Wine and Crossover. Recently, finally got that working on Mac, I believe. Yeah, and Apple it already includes it in the latest game porting toolkit. This is why I always say when people downplay, like I know AVX 512 exists in a very different universe than AVX2. AVX2 is obviously far more common, far more utilized. But I'm just trying to tell people whenever you're trying to say, oh, this instruction set enhancement or something like that, that one shouldn't matter, shit like that, or this part happens on a separate core rather than being part of the main course, you just look stupid. Like in the modern world, you just get whatever like you can. Right? You don't create artificial bottlenecks for your stuff. If your system can leverage SME, AVX52, AVX512, AVX2, do it.
离谱了，105帧的平均帧比幻16 Air 的65帧高了非常之多。因为幻16 Air 这个时候瓶颈已经不在 GPU 上了 ，Meteor Lake 处理器已经遇到了。
Oh, that is true, but really? It would limit it at over a 185H doesn't allow it to go above 65 FPS. I didn't even think about it. Like, but I guess it makes sense, especially if you're also like dramatically increasing power draw with it in a mobile system. Yeah, man, that's a crazy
CPU 平均
change.
但很显然 M4 Max 的 CPU 还没到它的极限。接下来是《生化危机4》。M4 Max 在1440P 分辨率下，比 M3 Max 提升了15%左右，比搭载4070的幻16 Air 强了25%以上。那 M4 Pro 呢，就比4070移动版低不少了。1080P 下。
And by the way, they do mention here the power draw, and this is why I'm saying when people are like, "Oh, what about like the 4080 or the 4090? Look at the power draw. This is the GPU alone of the 4070. We are in the 100-watt range. Add another 25 watts for an RTX 4080 system, and add another 20 watts for a 4090 mobile system. And now you have a GPU that by itself will probably double the performance of the entire M4 Max die during gaming. This is why I think it's so absolutely unacceptable that somehow this is the test where they didn't give us power draws, even though they constantly compare a power draw on the mobile SoCs. Why? Why do they not have a total power draw for the SoC on the Apple chips here?
M3 Max 会被4070反超，而 M4 Max 呢，则依然能够保持小幅领先。接下来就是重头戏了，咱们来看看这几台 Mac 转移 Windows 游戏。
I mean, I guess that's the main event, but that's also a silly event.
毕竟这可真是层层转移啊，又要把 ARM 转移。
By the way, there is a chance, and I'm not saying it's actually true, but knowing what I know from like the compatibility layer between Windows and Linux, there is a chance that the frame time consistency could actually be more stable through a translation layer than it is natively on Windows. We see that where Linux on Steam Deck, that is completely underpowered, actually fixes some stutters, some frame time related stutters over x80. Oh, well, it is also an x86 system over Windows code. So I would actually love to see like a digital foundry, like frame time thing. And you can see the frame time, well, I guess they didn't lock it, but there are spikes here, which suggest that it's, I don't know. I don't actually know what that kind of frame time spike would be if it's solid 60 FPS, because the game is limited to 60,
转移
right?
到 Metal 运行。那在这种状态下 ，M4 Max 又能发挥出什么样的性能呢？先来看看赛博朋克2077啊，目前在转移之后 ，M3、M4 的硬件光追还不能开启啊。在无光追的高画质下，1440P 分辨率下 ，M4 Max 的平均帧比4070的幻16 Air 低了15%左右，比 M3 Max 的表现呢倒是高了不少。M4 Pro 呢则依然只有 M4 Max 一半多点的帧数表现。那1080P 下 ，M4 Max 和4070的差距就进一步拉大了。看来双重转移在2077里的性能折损可并不算小。
Yeah. That gap isn't crazy, but the M3 Max definitely like because it is the chip that throughout its like existence was more comparable to the RTX 4070. Through like somewhere in the next 6 months, we will get like 5070s, 5080 GPUs. But given the performance layer, let me turn off actually subtitles. The frame times on the Mac, especially in 1440p, look at that inconsistency here. Look, it's constantly spiking up and down. Now, granted, it does so with a higher frame rate, so the relative stability, especially on a VRR screen, should still be pretty good. But look at the Mac here above, right above that, and I think that's even just the M3 Max, right? Not the M4. Yeah, you can see that frame time graph for most of the runtime is perfect, and then there is one spike, which almost looks like an ECG spike. Like that could be a traversal stutter. That could be one of the instances where the game just loads more part of the area. The engine that From Software uses is really prone to those kinds of traversal and basically like loading stutters instead of actually like generating a loading screen or something, because it's a fully open world game. It will instead have that huge stutter. You see more stutters in 1080p, but for an overall consistency, and then you see stutters again on the Max, but then here the M4 Pro is just perfectly smooth. So I'm really, really confused. But what I said about and what Oni-chan has agreed here on is that it seems like the translation layer might actually be fixing some frame time issues, but it's leaving the engine problems, because those obviously cannot be fixed entirely here.
不知道2077的 Mac 原生版上线之后会有什么样的表现？那接下来呢是黑神话悟空。
Oh yeah, sorry, I need subtitles again.
说真的啊，当我看到 MacBook 在运行黑神话悟空的时候，有一种不太真实的感觉啊，感觉隔壁叔叔的病都治好了。最终 M4 Max 跑到了 1440p 40帧 1080p 50。
The problem here is they offer like average FPS. I would have liked 1% lows. They're very, very good at showing actual perceived performance. Obviously, for proper 60 FPS gaming, you would take the 4070 here. But honestly, you can see that there's some weird bottlenecking here on the M4 Max. Getting only 20% more performance in 1080p. I assume this is where it hits a CPU bottleneck, similar to what we saw with the bottleneck of the 185H. In the beginning of the testing for Baldur's Gate. So yeah, that is a problem for the compatibility layer. And here, by the way, you can actually see that here it's actually the NVIDIA GPU that actually has far more stable frame times. So this is where native optimization definitely helps. Nishan saying the spike could also be garbage collectors if the game do use it. Yeah, it's really hard to say with Elden Ring what the issues are. Like it's weird. The FromSoft's engine is so weird in that regard. It looks pretty good, but the anti-aliasing is pretty shit. The CPU utilization is not fantastic. At 30 FPS, if you like limit it, it runs at an unstable frame rate, constantly spiking between like 33 milliseconds and 50. Yeah, so it's really weird in that regard.
11帧的平均帧，那虽然比起
I need subtitles again.
4070还是低了不少，但能玩，甚至还能比较流畅的玩黑神话悟空这件事情，本身就已经出乎我的意料了。而且似乎 M4 Max 的性能被转移过程严重的拖累了，甚至于 1080p 下 M4 Max 直接没法和 M4 Pro 拉开差距。
Yeah, you can see here. This is like 15% improvement, which suggests to me that we are basically CPU limited in that translation layer here. So, and the M3 Max, therefore, we might be actually almost at exactly the limit here. And that's why here, for a 4.5 gigahertz CPU, with all the bottleneck that Apple has to offer, we are at 51. We see the M4 Pro not being even 10% slower. And then we see the M3 Max coming in below, similar to how we've seen the scaling for single-core results across other tests.
那这个表现就很奇怪啊。那我们最后还跑了一下埃尔登法环，可惜的是，游戏转移运行起来虽然没啥问题，但我们在 Windows 平台下用的帧数解锁工具，在 Mac 平台上是不能用的，所以只能顶着60帧的限制来跑。因此，我们又额外加了压力更高的 4K 分辨率来看看真实的。
This is stuff where, yeah, again, translation layer over native when the native implementation is quite bad. The M4 Max is still stuttery for its frame time, but I would argue more stable than the 4070 laptop here. This is probably comparison given how scaling works around the level of a 4080, but definitely below a mobile 4090. We have perfect scaling between the M4 Pro and the M4 Max. So seemingly no CPU bottlenecks or anything like that. And then yeah, we see like an 18% improvement from the M3 Max. Nothing too surprising given all the other improvements that we have seen. And the M3 Max roughly matches the RTX 4070. So yeah, I'm quite happy with such a result. If all translated games ran like that, you bet your ass I would be using like the game porting toolkit a lot more often.
的性能差距，最终 4K 分辨率下 ，M4 Max 以一个相当大的优势超过了4070啊，层层转移后的性能居然还能干掉4070，我是真没想到啊！基本上 M3 Max 就可以持平4070了。M4 Pro 在这里真的就只有 M4 Max 一半左右的帧数表现，看起来似乎越是像法环这种图形
Ring of Magic, that's a cute translation for Elden Ring.
那这5个游戏测试下来呢，给我最深刻印象的倒不是说这个 M4 Max 的游戏性能有多强啊，
no
而是现在
consumption.
Mac 玩游戏的体验完全跟我之前设想的不一样啊。目前的 Mac 在运行 Windows 游戏时呢，要通过 GPTK 2.0的层层转译来运行，但意外的是运行效果上
I wonder, like, they've been pretty aggressive in running all that stuff. We have some in Russian, and more Asian letters. I apologize, I have to switch between so many languages in my head. Thank you. Спасибо за поздравления. Огромное. Люблю в ответ. And then we have, since they're testing GPTK, I assume it's either DXVK or D3D Metal. Yep, D3D Metal translates DX12 to Metal. My team works on DXMT, which translates DX11 to Metal API. And CPU bottleneck is indeed the issue. Well, you see, I'm well informed. And Royalski feels kind to watch Geekerwan in an English stream as a Chinese. Nice. Yeah. I feel like that about an anime that I'm currently watching, which shout out to it. I always forget what it's called. What are those suggestions? What the F? Okay. Alia sometimes hides her feeling in Russian. It's an anime, it's a high school romance, and one of the girls basically sometimes, because she's half Russian, says like her feelings in Russian, which if the title didn't give it away, her name is Alisa. That's why she's abbreviated Alia, because you definitely need to abbreviate a name like Alisa. And yeah, what's hilarious is that she will say sometimes stuff like "Я люблю тебя" or whatever in Russian, and the boy actually understands it, Masachika, and but he pretends like he doesn't to not embarrass her. So, and as somebody who is a native Russian speaker, because I grew up for the first 6 years in Moldova, yeah, it's funny. I have a similar feeling to you, Royost, where I'm watching something that needs like technically double the subtitles, but I'm actually watching the German dub with, of course, where the Russian is still like the Russian, and I understand both languages, so I feel like I'm double cheating the anime.
还挺原生的，甚至也没有说出现很多像真实时间异常啊之类的这种额外状况。而且即便是转移之后，在图
I
形
assume they meant like frame time issues.
技术比较传统的游戏里，GPU 性能的折损幅度还相当的小
By。the way, what is the accelerator? Let's just switch to 1.1. Yeah, Kizo, I understand. Спасибо Саше, Кристине, Каролине, Эвелине и Натуле. Всем привет в ответ. Я понял то, что это вы. Я сначала задумался, но потом понял. Целую.
甚至于 M4 Max 在法环里依然可以战胜移动版的4070，但转
There are translation problems. Which one? I always hate that because the game here changes. Like, not the game changes, but like I cannot read the game anymore. So that was it Elden Ring at the end?
转译呢也有转译的问题。首先，就算游戏运行起来再原生，想要运行起来游戏也不是谁都能够轻松做到的。 它还是有一定的学习成本在的，你需要折腾一番才能正常玩游戏。其次，像2077和黑神话悟空这种图形技术比较先进的游戏，转移的效率呢就并不是很高，甚至可能会让 M4 Max 掉到4060的性能水平。而且黑神话悟空在 M4 Max 平台上目前运行的情况并不完美啊，有的时候会出现程序异常卡住的情况。那这个呢就要继续等待 GPT 4的更新。
Stability issue with translation stuff is definitely why I'm holding back from it. Sometimes it will take just like the smallest update. This is why, for example, I have ended my crossover license, like it's ending in 2 weeks or something like that, and I did not prolong it because it simply doesn't make sense to me. Like, I have my PS5, now my PS5 Pro. There's very, very little reason for me to game on my M1 Max MacBook Pro, which at that point is slower than my PS5 Pro, was very comparable to my PS5. Yeah, I don't even know if I would recommend it, but I guess if you already need a powerful system, Mac system, and you want to game a little bit on the side, then yeah, then it's an enjoyable thing.
优化新平台了，所以目前 GPTK 在游戏当中的表现，主要还是满足一个从无到有的水平，让 Mac 用户的确可以玩到绝大多数的 Windows 游戏。但你要想真正获得好的游戏体验啊，还是得未来原生游戏生态逐渐建立起来之后，才能够去更上一层楼。那跑完了游戏啊，我们再来试试看，让 Mac 起步内存变大的幕后推手 AI。我们打算来试试看，在本地部署大语言模型的情况下 ，M4 Max 和 M4 Pro 到底有我们手上的
？Yeah, by the way, yeah, this will lead into, in my opinion, the best joke that Geekerwan has ever made on their channel. We do see the RAM differences where Apple did, unfortunately, they did have. Wait, okay, no, that's a Geekerwan choice. Actually, for another $200, you can get the 64 gigabytes M4 Pro system on the Mac Mini. It's the M4 Pro and the MacBook Pro that maxes out at 48 gigabytes, and of course. Unlike what some idiots on Twitter will tell you, you cannot really use system level CPU to fully accelerate GPU memory because the speed is different, the timings are different, like just the level of overhead of constant communication that would have to happen between the CPU and GPU. This is why the RTX 6080 with 48 gigabytes of memory does not cost you like $400 more, but it actually costs you like 2,000 plus more. I've seen like very different pricing, probably depending on which mass order you get. But if you probably want to get one, like don't forget, this is a single fan card, right? This is a blower design. This one actually is slower than the RTX 4090. Usually those blower designs are optimized for around 300 watts. The RTX 4090 is at 450 watts. Plus, this is, as far as I know, this is GDDR6 memory, while this is GDDR6X memory. But I think because this one has like extra security, like extra like not quality of life features, but like in an emergency case, what is that called? It's basically memory with like a safety buffer. Yeah, I believe GDDR6X is simply not available in that. Translator on Silicon Mac be like x86 to ARM64, DX1112 to Vulkan to Metal. Yeah, it's best now because it's better now because you can translate at least directly DX11 and 12 to Metal and Vulkan to Metal through Molten VK. But yeah, sometimes some stuff will be missing, so maybe you will have to do like a double translation. Yeah, it's very like, plus it's not just the API, but just the way it's generally leveraged for the system. The way like Linux and Windows are just so like in tandem because Linux still leverages the same x86 CPUs. It still leverages the same GPUs from the same brands, and those brands even design their APIs for Linux as well. So yeah, it's really impressive that stuff runs well on Mac at all, right? Like maybe it's not as impressive anymore that it runs on Mac at all, because you would want it to work. Why else design it? But the fact that in some games you will beat the native version, and in other versions you might fix issues like frame time inconsistencies, and in other games you will roughly match the efficiency per watt, right? Because Apple will potentially underperform a 4070 but also use way less power. Yeah, it's very impressive.
RTX 6000 ADA 集成的水准，我们使用了欧拉码。
Let me actually look it up. RTX. Oh, what is it called? Is it an A6000? Because it's ADA GPU. RTX 6000 ADA. Yeah. RTX 6000 ADA. Roski, I'm just using my Windows PC like a PlayStation after got a Mac. That's the right way. Yeah, I would probably do it that way if I didn't have my PlayStation. Yeah. So that's German. Can it wait? If I switch to English, that's actually something I want to explore with you guys. Switch to English. Yeah, I can actually get to the English website here. So you will need to find a partner. So let's look at the data sheet for the RTX 6000. 384-bit over GDDR6. Yes, the RTX 4090 gives you over 1,000 here. So you are using slightly slower memory. I do believe the die is the full die. Let me look at it. RTX 4090 specs. Change to English. GeForce RTX 4090. Yeah, Tech Power Up does have some good summaries. That one has how much of the die is enabled? Yeah, it has lower T-flops here. How many of it has 16,384 shader units. This one has 18,000. So the point is, this is the fully enabled die, but it has low memory bandwidth and it's clocked lower. This is why this card basically spreads its workflow over more cores, clocks them lower, helps them to find a better spot on the efficiency curve. That's why it's on at 300 watts. And yeah, that's basically it. RTX 6000. Shop now. Okay. Can I buy a standalone RTX 6000? Yeah. See buying options. NVIDIA. Okay. $6,800. This is over $5,000 over the MSRP of the RTX 4090. You're paying $5,000 for 24 gigabytes of memory. In comparison, Apple.com. Gift Magic. Oh, it's their holiday season stuff has started. Mac Mini. $14.99 base price. For the M4 Pro, $13.99. I apologize. $400 for 24 gigabytes of extra memory. That's 12 times cheaper than the price of memory, essentially, on the RTX ADA 6000. And yes, for $200 more, you can get yourself a 64 gigabyte system. Jesus. 2 times 4090 is just another thing. Yeah, you're basically adding 2 4090s at like scalper prices, by the way, not at MSRP. The MSRP for the 4090 is $1,600. And don't forget, the raw power will be below the 4090 because it has less memory bandwidth and it clocks its cores significantly lower, even though it has a few more of those. So it can fit into a 300 watt envelope because 300 watts is more more what like pros actually want. They don't want a 450 watt card that blows too much heat into their room and is way too loud, consumes way too much power, sits way too outside the efficiency curve. Yeah, so you get 64 gigs of memory, the M4 Pro, 8 terabytes of storage, and gigabit Ethernet. And you basically this is what you pay for 24 gigabytes of RAM on the Ada 6000 versus the RTX 4090. And once you get the Ada 6000, you still need to find a CPU, preferably like a Threadripper or something like that. This is insane. Yeah, NVIDIA 4090 fans are bigger, well, than Apple fans. NVIDIA is absurd. Yeah, it's the 4090 is it's honestly a good enthusiast card. I think it's relatively well balanced, especially for the time it came out. I really hope that the RTX 5090 has at least 32 gigs of memory. Otherwise, in terms of like pricing on issues like that, if Apple really manages to convince more pros of like the advantages of macOS, the fact that you can get that Mac Mini here, the fact that you can quite honestly get, even like, granted the Mac Studio is overpriced because it's an older architecture, but actually consider that this machine is basically silent. Even the Ultra will not consume more power than the Ada 6000 and definitely less than the 4090, right? And look at the memory, right? So for $4,000, you get 64 gigabytes of memory. Again, and I did add, like, for fun, 4 terabytes of storage at Apple's pricing on the Mac Mini. If you're doing like server workloads, you might as well not care about storage. You will probably connect it to like a server system for that anyway, from which to access the data. Yeah, so that system here, like, let's just even go crazy, and let's say you want the full chip. This is where Apple likes their profit margin, because I believe a similar, like, half the upgrade is $400, something like that, and now this one is $1,000. So over 2 times as expensive. Let's go with 192 gigs of memory. Let's go. Let's keep terabyte. Let's keep storage out of it, right? You're basically at the price of an of the Ada 6000, and that system by itself will have. Just so I don't make any mistakes, 192 divided by 24. It has 8 times more memory. So just so you know, and that memory is also usable for the CPU, and you already get the CPU. So this is why Apple's Mac Pro is $7,000, because in Apple's mind, at that point, it's not competing anymore, even close to the RTX 4090. It's only competing to systems with like what we discussed here. 4080 costs like 1.5K now. Really? Is it getting scalped again? That sucks, man. That card shouldn't be above 1,000 with 16 gigabytes of memory, and given the huge binning over the RTX 4090, that just sucks. Yikes. Let's continue.
RTX 6000 Ada 和4090上分别能跑出多少 tokens 每秒的速度？那这个速度呢，你可以理解为大模型读词儿的速度啊，以及统计运行时的显存占用率。最终在7B 到32B 的规模下 ，M4 Max 的推理速度。
Okay, let me just try to understand the results. So RTX 4090, 7 billion, 32 billion. So we are hitting some bottlenecks here for a surprising amount. I don't know what that's token per second, and that is, actually don't know what metric that is.
大概都可以跑到4090 50%到60%的情况。
This is again, this is where the Ultra, but again, like, does Apple not scale? Like, is it not using the GPU? Is it using the neural engine? Why are those cards performing the same? I'm a little confused, because those cards don't have the same amount of bandwidth. They don't have the same amount of memory, at least the M4 Pro. They definitely don't have the same amount of GPU raw performance. So is it the neural engine bottleneck? That I'm honestly wondering.
M3 Max
Can I
M4 Pro。
Okay, no.
由于 GPU 性能的差距和两张 N 卡的差距呢，也会相应的增大。但有趣的情况出现在运行
yeah,
72
72 models. This is the RTX 4090 hitting a clear bottleneck. We see the we see the RTX 6000 actually doubling that performance. And then we see Apple being able to double that performance. So clearly not being bottlenecked by anything. It means the graphics memory that's used. Wait, why is that? Okay. Okay. Yeah, why is that even a metric? So the performance is only left. Okay, now that makes a lot more sense. Thank you. So the performance, so on 7B, the M4 Max is 20% faster than the M3 Max, roughly scaling with its GPU performance. It's not quite double the performance over the M4 Pro, but it makes sense. Again, in your head, you should probably double it for the M4 Ultra, maybe a little less so, at that point beating the 4090. 14 billion, this is where you still have similar gaps, but obviously low performance.
M4 Max 的推理速度大概都可以跑到4090%、50%到60%的性能。那 M3 Max 呢和 M4 Pro 由于 GPU 性能的差距和两张 N 卡的差距呢，也会相应的增大。但有趣的情况出现在运行72B 模型的。
And obviously at 72 billion, this is where we have still below 48 gigabytes of utilization, but this is where our 128 gigabyte systems absolutely excel. You see that 48 gigabytes of system memory doesn't equal 48 gigabytes available memory. So I assume this just crashed. I assume this one tried to run only the less demanding stuff. And then we see double the performance of on the M4 Max versus the Ada 6000. So I assume if you actually spend a measly $200 to get the Mac Mini 2, the 64 gigabytes, it would have a lot more overhead. It could keep like 8 gigabytes or so for the system. Use 44 gigabytes for the task and stuff like that, and still have some overhead. And at that point, I assume it would keep scaling the way it has scaled across most tasks. But thank you, Royest. I was like, megabytes, what are you doing here? But like, yeah, this makes sense. And yeah, now you can imagine, of course, like a 256 gigabyte M4 Ultra system here.
那这里唯一
Now I need subtitles again.
能顺利运行、不出意外的平台，居然只有 M3 Max 和 M4 Max 的两台 MacBook Pro 啊，因为它们的128G 统一内存没有爆显存。啊，没错啊，在72B 的规模下，4090由于爆显存。
Guys, we've been streaming for about 3 hours. This is one of the longer streams I've done in a while. Please like the video if you haven't yet done so. Share it out to anybody who you think might enjoy it. Comment. You see, I love interacting with a lively live chat, but also please comment afterwards. That helps a lot with the algorithm. And of course, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet done so. Whenever you catch me live, you can leave a small donation or a small birthday wish in the form of a super chat or a super sticker right in the live chat, or you can become a channel member right here on YouTube or a supporter over on Patreon. However you can support this channel, it's very much appreciated.
速度已经会变得异常的慢了，实际上32B 就已经是它的极限了。那显存更大的 RTX 6000i 的会好一些，但依然难逃爆显存的命运。反倒是128G 内存的两台 MacBook， 虽然 GPU 速度肯定是赶不上两张巨无霸 N 卡的，但它确实可以在不爆显存的情况下顺利运行72B 大模型。那实际上，如果说苹果的内存是金子做的
，that joke is so good. In fact, if Apple's memory is made of gold，
直接就是正金做
，because you're paying $200 more here, $200 more here，
409
then oh man, I missed it.
的内存是金子做的话，老黄的显存呢
Then NVIDIA's memory is made directly of vibranium. Yeah, that is such an insane upcharge for 24 gigabytes of actually slower memory. So yeah, that's crazy.
直接就是正金做的，4090和 RTX 6000i 的几乎完全相同的东西。
And yeah, you can see that this is over 3 times as expensive. So that does make sense given the. I mean, 15,000 actually lines up pretty well with our 1,600 MSRP. So 50,000 here. I saw like a 6,000 price. Maybe this is then closer to like 48th or something like that. So yeah.
就因为显存容量不一样，价格直接差出了一台顶配 MacBook Pro 啊。那如果你想要更大的显存，你可能要加一辆小米速7的价格才能买回家。
Jesus. But this does have multiple compute dies, doesn't it? It cannot just be memory. They cannot charge 6 times for memory here. For less memory than what card is that?
那这也是为
I have an Intel RX A750 GPU, but still goes back to M1 Pro for stuff. Yeah, I mean, the Pro, well, it's the M1 Pro, but yeah. But the RX GPUs are not super high performance. So if you got like an M1 Max, that would be legit faster, but it would also still have the compatibility issues. But then again, so do RX GPUs actually have compatibility issues. A lot of those have only been fixed like in the last year or so. What is performance when you run out of memory? 16 gigabytes on Mac goes further than 8 gigs of VRAM. Absolutely. Plus use 30 gigabyte swap is better than crashing. Absolutely. If you have a system that is optimized for itself, right, then why not do that? You have sort of swap with like system memory, but that is really not the same. And whatever you do for swap, it's not really great for GPU tasks. It's just not fast enough in any way. But if you can like potentially use all your internal RAM on Macs for like a GPU task like this, and then you'll just like dedicate a lot of the OS for swap. Let's say you have to run this on a 24 gigabyte system or something like that. That is all the more better, right?
为什么目前一些开发者会选择 Mac 平台去跑 AI 推理的原因。
And don't forget, if you're really going crazy with one of those large systems, you usually would have to pair it with a pretty nice CPU too, and pretty nice CPUs on desktop. They do cost money, they consume a lot more power, then it will have to make you reconsider what kind of system you're building.
内存确实是非常的贵啊，但这么贵的内存和老黄放在一起，突然也有了性价比啊！这世界真的太抽象了。M4 Pro 和 M4 Max 的性能表现我们已经看完了，我们再来看看这两台机器的散热表现。先聊聊 Mac Mini 啊，这么小的机器塞进了 M4 Pro 啊，着实还是让我捏了把汗呢。 这次苹果给 Mac Mini 引入了之前在 MacBook Pro 上已经引入了的高能耗模式，也就是一个调教更激进的模式。那我们呢也会来测测看，它分别在自动模式和高能耗模式下持续性能的差别。先来看看自动模式下的表现，在自动模式下，15轮 R23测试当中，它可以维持在43瓦的功耗下，此时大核的频率可以维持。
That is the M4 Pro, okay, 43 watts. Yeah, makes sense.
3.7 G 赫，稍低于最高的3.85 G 赫。 小核则是稳定在2.6
Which gives like room for the M4 Max to be like around 55 watts or 60.
这个情况下的持续性能呢，可以维持在22300分左右啊，比峰值性能呢大概低5%左右。
Yeah, quite honestly, I always think that this performance drop is designed by Apple. Like, this is not thermal throttling to me. This to me sounds like they want to hit this performance level and they don't want to hit this performance level because it would keep either the chip much hotter than they would want to. They would lose some of their efficiency in a very, very unneeded way. So they run the test briefly at that level. Maybe that test is so short. Maybe your task is so short that with that performance level during that period of time, you can just get by, right? But once they see, oh, you actually need to run it for a few minutes and even longer, let's give you a performance that is good, sustainable, doesn't make the system way too loud, doesn't overheat the chip. Even if it's not overheating, it doesn't damage it long term to run it at that heat. Doesn't mean that we need to put too much voltage into the chip, which, as we've known from the 3900K and the 4900K, can really damage the system. So yeah, there is quite a lot of stuff here to consider.
风扇转速呢，则是被控制在了3150转下，噪音是相当克制的，人为噪音大概。
By the way, I tested yesterday my apartment. Mine sits at around 33 to 37 decibels. At like ambient sound levels. I guess the street nearby is really, even with like the isolated glass windows, is like really bad. So 40 decibels to me in my apartment, especially at the decent distance, would be basically imperceptible. Yeah. That 96 gigabytes is just for AI stuff, I believe, not really useful for general users. Yeah, it's a data center GPU, that's obvious. I know they have like their like tens of thousands of dollars systems that even have like CPUs already built in and stuff like that, but that didn't seem to be that way. I wasn't actually aware they had a system with 96 gigabytes of memory. I wonder if there are any compromises to that to just fit it into still a standard enclosure. I guess we can do a minute of research for it. NVIDIA 96 gigabyte GPU. I guess that's like a Quadro system. Okay, so I guess that's like a more expensive A6000. Whatever, except all. 48 gigabytes. Wait, what the actual... Why? How can you give me that result up to... Oh, it's 96 gigabyte with NVLink. Okay. Oh, that's the H100. Well, yeah. Yeah, that card, yeah, that's absolutely insane. Those cards are often even disconnected from the main architecture. Yeah, they are built on HBM memory. Yeah, that card plays an entirely different liga. I mean, it still makes no sense for it to be as expensive, but I would argue that with over almost 3.4 terabyte per second of memory bandwidth, it would probably give you very good results. And yes, you read that correct. Because of the use of HBM memory, it actually has 10 times the memory bus over what Apple uses. But I guess you can use that. Oh, Jesus. This is HBM3. I always thought it was 3E, but okay. Yeah, so I guess we cleared that up.
大概是40.5 dB。那即便是双烤的情况下呢，风扇依然是稳定控制在3150转。CPU 的大核这时候会进一步降低到3.1 G 赫 ，GPU 呢则可以维持在1.4 G 赫的频率下。此时 CPU 可以维持在27瓦左右 ，GPU 大概可以维持23瓦左右。
Is that on the M4 Pro? Really? The GPU can be maintained at 23 watts? That's really, really good. That means that the M4 Max, if you combine GPU and CPU power load, would still come in below 100 watts, definitely below 120.
新引入的高能耗模式就比较类似于 Windows PC 的性能模式啊，在15轮 R3 测试当中，它会先尽量吃散热系统的热容量，那风扇呢会非常缓慢的加速啊，在这个过程当中，你会看到性能先小幅度下降，再随着风扇转速的升高慢慢升上去，最终会跑回到满血频率。风扇转速呢是在跑在第10轮，也就是持续满载第6到7分钟左右的时候，达到4200转左右的转速。
watts
这个情况下和满转4900转。
Like we've had tests here now, knowing that the GPU is at 23 watts. Here, that's the M4 Pro versus the RTX 4070. Let's look at an optimized game. The rest is questionable. So let's look at Baldur's Gate before any CPU bottlenecks. By the way,
首先咱们来看一下最高画质。
Here, M4 Pro delivers you 2/3 of the performance of the RTX 4070. At 1/4 the performance. So yeah, that efficiency gain is absolutely amazing. So Jesus. And I don't see how by sticking with 4 nanometer there is any chance that the RTX 50 series is so much more efficient that it helps overtake that.
跑出了5%左右啊，风扇上去。 大了一点，但还不算到7分钟左右的时候，会看到性能先小幅度下降，再随着风扇转速的升高慢慢升上去，最终会跑回到满血频率。风扇转速呢，则在跑在第10轮，也就是持续满载第6到7分钟左右。
It basically pushes it somewhat outside its efficiency window. Maybe you just need that performance. For whatever reason, maybe you're willing to accept that the device could degrade faster because of it. I would prefer to run it like that and not hear the fans, but I guess Apple is really listening to the pros. John Turnus here seems to be really into giving the pros what they ask for, so I'm not complaining.
的时候达到4200转左右的转速，那这个情况下和满转
4200 RPM, not terrible, yeah.
4900转还有一定的距离，但 CPU 已经可以跑满性能了。此时的噪音比自动模式明显大了一点，但还不算很吵。
Still below
最重要的
50
是它的
watts,
风扇转速
not
其
too
实上升
bad.
的非常慢，
But yeah,
所以
at
如
that
果你
point
的
it would be audible for me.
负载并不是
Absolutely.
持续时间非常长的满载情况，风扇其实是很难真的变响的。高能耗模式下的双烤呢，风扇就会慢慢跑满4900转，那这个时候它噪音会跑到53 dB 啊，那这时候它的噪音是比较吵的，主观上和游戏本类似，最终稳定在 CPU 大核 3.5G 赫，小核呢则依然跑在 2.6G 赫上 ，GPU 维持在 1.5G 赫下，此时呢基本上可以输出满血性能啊，那这个时候 CPU 功耗可以维持在35瓦，GPU 功耗维持在30瓦，那这时候整机输入功率呢会跑到115瓦，那对它这个小身板来说，我对它的散热能力已经满意了。那 M4 Max 的16寸 MacBook Pro 作为移动工作站，继承了 M3 Max 的风扇策略，不像 M2 Max 和 M1 Max 时代那么保守，它的自动模式可以看作是 Windows 笔记本的静音模式。R3 15轮测试当中，最终会从
Don't care about R23 again.
60瓦左右的 CPU 峰值功耗降低到50瓦左右，那此时的 CPU 频率呢会维持在大核 3.68G 赫、小核 2.6G 赫的水平。风扇转速在自动模式下会控制在最高3600转，此时的噪音呢大约是40.5 dB， 不知道是巧合还是有意为。
Yeah, Apple seems to like that volume level.
那这个噪音刚好和这台 Mac Mini 的自动模式是完全一样的，对笔记本来说是非常安静的水平。自动模式下双烤，那最终呢 CPU 会跑在大核 2.1G 赫、小核 2.6G 赫下 ，GPU 则是跑在 1.47G 赫下。此时 CPU 维持17瓦，那 GPU 是维持在25瓦的功耗。风扇
The M4 Max has a GPU in automatic mode running at 25 watts. What? Now I'm confused again. A peak 63 watts. Well, that's very different. Ah, Jesus. Like, what is the utilization of that test?
呢依然控制在
I mean, like, because I'm not interested in the average power consumption in this specific test. I actually want to know what the peak power consumption is. Just for you're so good at finding the peak power consumption on mobile chips. Why suddenly do you have this huge discrepancy between average and peak? Can you please start doing that on your mobile chip tests? So that they're less misleading when you tell them the chips run at 18 watts or something like that.
3600转的转速下，而在高能耗模式下 ，MacBook Pro 的策略就非常激进了，激进的简直不像一台 MacBook。那么在测试开始1分钟左右，它的风扇转速就会跑上5000转以上，直冲5600转。最终在15轮 R3 的测试下，它都可以维持在满血频率工作 ，CPU 呢也会稳定在60瓦左右的功耗。那这个时候的噪音已经来到了52 dB 啊，那这个噪音已经接近游戏本
power consumption level makes a lot of sense when if you know like how the M3 Max already ran.
高能耗模式下的双烤反而风扇会转得慢一点，跑到5000转，噪音49 dB。此时 CPU 大核 3G 赫，小核 2.6G 赫 ，CPU 持续功耗30瓦 ，GPU 跑到了 1.5G 赫，持续功耗32瓦。看来高能耗模式在 MacBook Pro 上的作用还是非常显著的，而且 M4 Max 高频加多核的设计已经完全拉满了这代 MacBook Pro 的散热能力了。如果苹果还想继续提升规格，就势必要增加散热能力。所以我认为
，Well, I mean, N3P is 5% more efficient. There is probably some architectural gains to have. There is faster memory to add, like 10700 megatransfers memory. Or even at that point, LPDDR6 is not too far off. And of course, there's 2nm A16. So over the next 3 years, we'll have a year of 5% gains through the node. We'll have another year of 10-15% gains over the node, and then another year of like 8 to 10% gains from just the node. So there's a lot that Apple can still do. I would like a little bit more cooling, just so it can be always quiet in like regular tasks. But I know that given the efficiency gains that are coming over the next few years and how much more expensive chips are going to get, I would honestly not bet that Apple would like double or triple down on the amount of like cooling material.
X 芯片的规格应该很难再继续变得更大了。当然呢，最后我也测试了一下新款 MacBook Pro 16寸的续航表现。
MacBook Pro 16-inch, that's with the M4 Max, gives you half an hour more than the M3 Max. The MacBook Air, similar results. Oh yeah, they cannot test obviously the M4 Pro because they tested it in the Mac Mini. After looking at 4090, M4's value looks even better considering how much you get for the same price at 3.5K. Yeah, and don't forget, there's still also the big difference between macOS and Windows, which unless you're reliant on certain Windows stuff, you see, even with gaming, you kind of can get by with macOS these days.
最终这台顶配的 M4 Max MacBook Pro 16跑出了13小时6分钟的续航成绩，比起相同系统版本的 M3 Max 顶配机型长了半个多小时，算是一个小幅进步啊。M4 Pro 机型的续航呢应该会更长一些，不过即便是 Max 机型的续航也已经超过了几乎所有的 Windows 笔记本，在移动工作站领域应该属于断层领先的水平。但 MacBook Pro 的续航最大的瓶颈应该还是在 Mini LED 显示器上啊，这玩意儿还是非常耗电的。那这期视频到这里就接近尾声了。那么 M4 半年前呢，在 iPad
Yeah, I mean they did test like that the iPad had like a massive efficiency gain for its screen from going from mini LED to tandem OLED. So I guess that is also something that Apple could do for the Mac itself by jumping to tandem OLED, because unless they bump up the brightness to 2000 nits or something crazy like that, there's a lot of room for them to just say like, oh, you know what, we're keeping the peak specs the same in terms of brightness, we're giving you the pixel by perfect brightness control, the thinner, more efficient screen, less heat generation in general, less draw on the battery, faster response times, all that jazz. Yeah, so by the time they switch to tandem OLED, I assume that gain in efficiency will probably outpace anything coming from the chip. It's just that so happens that the heat is not really generated down under. I became Australian when I said down under. I don't even know if that was Australian by the end. I guess I'm tired. But I get the heat. I mean, the battery provides the power flowing to the display, but then the heat gets generated in the display. And knowing what I know from the mini LED screen, they will have absolutely zero problem cooling down the mini LED screen over such a large surface area. That being said, we are almost 3 hours into the stream. Thank you guys for joining. Thank you for celebrating my birthday with me. Shout out again to Angelica, Max Maximus, and Steve, who are all MarkTech Pro Max supporters here on YouTube. And shout out to Max Maximus and Steve, who both left super generous super chats at $11.99 and $2.49 before the stream. Give a shout out to those guys. Royos, you're agreeing that you're waiting for the OLED, goes to the MacBook Pro, and then use the trade-in for whatever system you have. Making bigger OLED panel for MacBook, probably a pain. Yeah, I assume if they were just making 14 inches, that could work, but maybe the 16-inch version has like terrible yields. That sometimes happens with chips, that happens with displays. You just have a technology that's generated, that's just designed for a certain size, and the second you go like 5, 10, especially 20% above it, it just all falls apart and your yields are dropped in half. One thing that is very fascinating to me and I think will interest you is actually Samsung yields 3 nanometer, 20%. So again, not sure how reliable that is, but Samsung's 3 nanometer node, that's their second generation one. The first generation was basically a complete failure. And they said that they like brought another company into helping them out with that node. Prince Sonavane, thank you so much for the birthday wishes. And people were saying a year ago that Samsung's yields had like improved to 50% of above, but now it seems like it's at 20%. And seemingly Samsung is even like shutting down factories and transistor factories, like factories for chips, are really, really expensive. Firing them back up is extremely expensive. Those machines don't like to be turned off. It's huge energy draw. You will have to do all the reliability testing all over again. So yeah, if it's actually true, so let's quickly read through this. Samsung latest semiconductor manufacturing technology is falling short of expectations as the company struggles to achieve acceptable production rates for its cutting-edge 3nm chips. Should be noted that Samsung's 3nm chip are actually adopting the GAFET gate-all-around transistors that TSMC is targeting for 2nm, but the density that they promised for 3nm is actually comparable to TSMC's 3nm on FinFET. So by the time TSMC hits 2nm GAFET and A16 with backside power delivery, and if Samsung still has years and years of improving yields ahead of them, they might just be screwed. That no wonder there are rumors they might be thinking of buying Intel, because Intel actually does have some pretty decent GAFET technology. It just Intel has no buyers for their nodes, not even really themselves. By the time they will like make 18A Panther Lake, there is a big question how many of those will actually sell. So by the time it comes around that Intel actually has to ship their GAFET stuff, and sometime next year, probably early 2026, that's when TSMC will be hitting 2nm GAFET, probably in like extreme mass production in comparison. So yeah, and Samsung seems to be like the cut kid in the corner. It's like just not knowing what to do. The latest rumors indicate that both versions of Samsung 3nm gate-all-around process produced fewer viable chips than anticipated. The initial targets set by the South Korean tech giant were aimed at 70% yield rate in volume production. However, the first, was not a great note, by the way. The first generation, called SF3E 3GAE, has only managed to achieve between 50 and 60% viable yield output. More troubling is the performance of the second generation. This is where the real efficiency and density gains actually were supposed to come from. That first gen was very much worse than like what M3B was for the 3nm node. So they really needed that second generation node. That first gen node was once they saw what it was, they never planned on really mass producing it. More trouble is the performance second gen, 20% usable chips, a figure that falls dramatically short of production yields. With that number, by the way, you might as well not produce anything because you will be losing money on it, right? If you're losing 80% of your chips, even if you're just designating those chips, I will have like guaranteed buyers in the form of myself with like the Samsung Galaxy S25, you're probably cheaper off buying like MediaTek chips or even the 8 Elite at that point. Because at least you will get that chip, you will know it works, you will not have like losses behind that chip. Yeah, it's crazy. The timing is particularly challenging for Samsung as major clients begin to reevaluate their manufacturing partnerships. For example, Nvidia was on Samsung's 8nm node, but then went with 4nm for RTX 4000. And even now, the second generation of 4nm basically, and 4P, is seemingly still better to Nvidia than to consider working again with Samsung, which is crazy given that Samsung was basically selling those chips at cost to Nvidia just so that anybody could please use our chips. Qualcomm has opted to produce its latest Snapdragon 8 Elite processors exclusively through rival TSMC's 3 nanometer facilities. Well, for Qualcomm, TSMC is not a rival, but yeah, I guess they mean rival to Samsung. Even more telling is the exodus of South Korean companies traditionally loyal to Samsung, who are now turning to TSMC's more reliable manufacturing process. And don't forget, TSMC is now in the hugely advantageous position. They have created so much 7 nanometer, which is now 6 nanometer, is refined, 5 nanometer, which is now N4P refined, and soon N3 production process. They can actually start, if they want to, lower the prices of those older nodes significantly while actually increasing the prices of the newer nodes. And they're like, you know what, the gap between N4 and N3 isn't that huge. However, if you're a company like NVIDIA and you make like 80% profit margins in server, you're probably gonna get the latest node at least a year later or something like that. It's surprising that seemingly Blackwell is on 4 nanometer, but I think Blackwell was internally delayed. At this point, I'm pretty sure that they just wanted to produce as many RTX 4000s for cheap, sell them while demand was extremely high, and then create Blackwell like a proper generational leap, save money by not giving actually a node jump, and then they will have an in-between architecture, which I always forget the name of, that will be server exclusive, and that will be 3 nanometer, and then a year later they will bring 3 nanometer to regular chips, and then a year after that they can bring 2 nanometer to servers. That's at least how I kind of see what NVIDIA is up to. But yeah, if you're Samsung, you cannot compete with that cadence regardless of what you're providing. While Samsung can claim the achievement of bringing 3 nanometer GAFA technology to market before TSMC's competing N3B process, which again, N3B is still FinFET, the technical victory rings hollow without the ability to mass produce chips. This is also one thing that I always have to say about Intel, because Intel, even though they might have good yields, I always want to question how big are the factories and how quickly could they ramp up a new factory, and what would happen to the yields if potentially they had to double or triple the production in the same factory, right? Would the yield stay the same? Would they be even remotely able to provide supply for a company like Apple? But yeah, at this point, we have no idea what will happen here. Development efforts are reportedly intensifying around the 2 nanometer manufacturing process. That is completely meaningless, because we had the same talk about 3 nanometer, because don't forget that Samsung's 4 nanometer node is actually dog shit. If you want to know how dog shit it is, then please use a Google Pixel, then you will know. So Samsung saying that now about 2 nanometer, that is meaningless. They're basically deflecting from the failures you see here. So again, I don't even know why we started talking about it. I think that's because they were like, oh, Apple needs more cooling. And I'm like, well, there are some decent node jumps ahead that can be leveraged. But we'll see. Thank you guys. 3.5 hours stream. That's absolutely crazy. I will probably not be streaming today, maybe on Thursday, depending on what news comes out and stuff like that. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining. Thank you for celebrating my birthday with me. Thank you for the nice birthday wishes. Thank you for the multiple languages and stuff like that. It was very, very fun for me. Love doing that with you guys. Love the community expanding and growing and intensifying. I've already given you all the YouTube Jazz recommendations for both indirect and direct support, so do it however you see fit. And last thank you for today, and I'll see you guys next time. This was Mark Tack, I guess the 28-year-old birthday boy. Thank you so much.